wind cave. We were star people. Many of us came from a place called the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, an ancient star grouping and constellation that contains worlds comprised of the gift of life-giving water. Water is life. Mini Wikoni. The Pleiadian influence is an absolute, but those of us who claim to be relatives of the Pleiadians share a common bond with other indigenous people, regardless of where we are geographically on the earth. We will always remain Pleiadian star people. Spiritually, we have become human beings of different races and ethnicities, but the origin of our spirit is the water. And for us, and as to who we are, as the tribal people in a family way, our name is Minkoju, its evidence. It means life's subsistence through the gathering and planting by the waters and or river. The Minikochu spend their lives living by the waters. This is something that many of our own people do not know or understand, but this is our history, not only of our physical existence, but also the history of our spiritual existence on Unsimaka. The book is Warrior Is by Robin and Harley Zephyr.
You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And happy Monday to you. Greetings from Portland, Oregon. Thom Hartmann here with you. Sean and Nick and Nate and Joyce and the whole crew ready to boogie. I want to start out today in the first hour. I want to talk about two things. One lurid and the other important. But, you know, news being what it is, the important stuff is the economy. And I'm going to get to that in just a minute. But let's start with the lurid. Just because it is literally at the top of every newscast. Jeffrey Epstein over the weekend died of suicide, apparent suicide. The New York coroner did a, whatever coroners do, autopsy, I guess, on him on yesterday, and they have not yet said whether it's a suicide or not. But I think we can probably safely assume it was. That's not the question, as far as I can tell. The question is, why was this allowed to happen, basically? Jeffrey Epstein, when he was 20 years old, was hired by Bill Barr's father to teach high school girls at the Dalton School. And, by the way, people were complaining about the way that he was interacting with those high school girls. That same Bill Barr's father wrote, around that same time, 1971, wrote a novel about sex slavery. You can find it on Amazon. It's called Space Relations, a slightly gothic interplanetary tale. One of the reviewers says, wow, a sexy sci-fi thriller from a classical scholar. This is a story about John Craig, a young man in the State Department of the future, who is confidently looking to take over from the secretary when he's captured by slavers and sold on the planet Kosar. His new master is the gorgeous Lady Morgan Sidney. Yeah. Will John Smith be able to save her and the planet from themselves? So anyhow, meanwhile, after his dad writes this book about sex trafficking, Jeffrey Epstein goes on to prosper in the sex trafficking business, apparently using sex trafficking of underage girls as the principal way to draw in or to blackmail or to influence wealthy, older white men.
I don't think the white is the important part here, but there it is. Anyhow, meanwhile, Trump's close friend Epstein introduces him to Melanie Knauss, who is now his wife. Excuse me, Melania, Knauss. I believe it's pronounced Knauss. And they end up married. Yeah, Jeffrey Epstein introduced Donald Trump to his current wife. Then Epstein gets arrested, and Bill Barr, the head of the Justice Department, recuses himself because his law firm had defended Epstein. And then after talking to Donald Trump, the next day, Bill Barr unrecuses himself and says, oh, no, I'll supervise the Epstein thing. Meanwhile, a woman files a lawsuit saying that both Epstein and Trump raped her when she was 13 and presents a picture of herself with Prince Andrew. The lawsuit is certified by a court. Following Epstein's arrest, reports come out that Barr's Justice Department now has hundreds of videos, movies, and pictures of Epstein's rich and famous and powerful male friends having sex with the girls that Epstein has been trafficking. Bill Barr and the Department of Justice, of course, supervise the prison into which Jeffrey Epstein is put while he's awaiting trial, where he mysteriously dies, presumably of suicide. And now, to take this into the realm of full-out bizarre, conservatives are suggesting, and over the weekend Donald Trump retweeted the suggestion, that Bill Clinton killed Jeffrey Epstein to shut him up. Because, you know, Bill Clinton runs the federal prison system, right? Right. Like, 19 years ago. I mean, are these guys smoking crack? This is absolutely bizarre. But there are a lot of questions being raised by this. And, I mean, we should keep in mind that these hundreds or thousands of apparently old, 16 millimeter movies and more modern videotapes and photographs of Epstein's girls, and they were girls, and the wealthy and powerful men that he was hooking them up with, that all this video and photographic evidence is apparently now in the possession of Bill Barr, whose dad had given Jeffrey Epstein his first job. After Epstein dropped out of college at the age of 20, Bill Barr's dad hired him to teach high school girls at the Dalton School, the school that Anderson Cooper went to. It's a real high-end prep school. So, very bizarre stuff. Okay, that's topic one. I don't know what to make of this other than that Bill Barr really needs to back out of this picture, and they need to bring in my opinion, they need to bring in a special prosecutor, somebody who is not affiliated with Jeffrey Epstein in any way. Bill Barr is so contaminated by Epstein, his law firm defended him, his dad hired him. His boss, Donald Trump, was Epstein's good buddy. Epstein introduced Donald Trump's current wife to him. You got Epstein and Trump on video looking at girls and Trump saying, hey, she's hot. I mean, it's time to take this out of the realm of the Trump administration, isn't it? Okay, number one. And number two, the economic winds are howling, and I think this is the really important story right now. In 2008, with this meltdown, we saw the result of 3 decades of neoliberalism in the United States and Europe, what we used to call Reaganism here in the U.S., and they used to call Thatcherism in the EU and the UK. And these neoliberal policies really shook the world's financial system. I mean, the deregulation of the banks that happened in 1998, 1999, and 2000 led right to, among other things, but led right to this banking crisis of 2008, the international financial crisis. But rather than resolving the problem by repudiating neoliberalism, including its emphasis on more money for rich people, less money for workers, no unions, big tax breaks for the wealthy, deregulation of corporations, from deregulating their pollution to deregulating banking, to so-called free trade and shipping jobs offshore. These are all neoliberal policies. This is all at the core of Reaganism. Keep in mind, Reagan negotiated NAFTA, proposed it, in fact. and Thatcherism. And rather than repudiating this ideology, this neoliberal ideology, what's been happening is that the world's central banks have been holding the economy together since 2008 with bubblegum and baling wire. I wrote a book called Crash of 2016, pointing out that the crash of 2008 is not over yet. We're still in it. And the only way that the central banks have been able to hold the economy together is dropping interest rates lower and lower and lower. And now it's reached the point where one of the largest banks in Denmark will pay you to take out a mortgage. Honest to God, not making this up. You borrow $100,000 from this bank to buy a house, and 10 years later, over the 10 years that you pay it back, at the end of 10 years after you've made all your payments, you will have only paid back around $990,000. The bank, it's a 0.5% negative interest rate. Seriously, negative interest rates. Now, the bank is charging some fees to cover their costs, and I get that, and I'm not talking about, the banking business here. What I'm pointing out is that you can't go any farther than this. You can drop interest rates to stimulate the economy from 6% to 5%, from 5% to 4%, from 4% to 3 or 2 or 1%, and even down to 0%. But when you start going into negative interest rates, which the European Central Bank has been in for a while now and Japan is flirting with and we're on the edge of, when you start going into negative interest rates, when you go beyond about a half a point, you can't go any farther. Countries can't afford it. Banks can't afford it. It's just the whole system collapses. We are right on the edge of this thing. And I mean, this is an absolutely unsustainable business model, and it shows us how central banks, desperate to stop the world from sliding back into the crisis of 2008, are failing. And now with Trump hassling Jay Powell, the head of our central bank, chairman of the Fed, into dropping interest rates here in the U.S. I mean, it's like everybody, it's like lemmings. The entire fiscal and economic group is like heading for the edge, apparently enthusiastically. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is fanning the flames of racial hatred. We've got a couple that committed a murder-suicide here, just a little bit north of us, last week, saying this was an elderly couple saying we can't afford the medical bills. We're going to take our own lives. Called the sheriff's department. Donald Trump is trying to get a labor secretary, Antonin Scalia, the son of Antonin Scalia, a lawyer who has spent his entire career trying to destroy labor unions, in charge of the Department of Labor. The Department of Labor, whose mandate is to support labor. Oh no! This guy is this guy is the lawyer for Walmart, right? I mean, he literally was the lawyer for Walmart. And I get this email from Donald Trump. Hey, Fred, did you see the latest New York Times headline? Probably not, considering they changed it after the whiny liberal mob cried enough to get it changed. That's right. The New York Times, one of the biggest fake news outlets, published a favorable headline of President Trump, and the Democrats lost their mind. They caused such an uproar that the paper republished it with a different headline bashing President Trump. Unbelievable. Democrats don't even care about the truth. They just want to read any lie that makes the president look bad. They can't get away with this, Fred. We can't let the mainstream media discredit our president to appease their liberal base, and it's up to you to hold them accountable. When the president needs help, he turns to the most powerful force in the world, the American people. Please click on this link. Take our official New York Times accountability survey by 11:59 p.m. tonight to let the biased New York Times know that we won't stand for their lies. Right, the survey, by the way, includes a pitch. Please give us money. A lot of strange stuff going on, and I haven't even begun to get into this whole thing of what's happening in rural America and how Trump and the cons and Fox News and everything are trying to really amp it up.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So we'll be back. Your thoughts on these things, my thoughts on other things, you know, more news to come. Stick around. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Jared in Downington, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jared, what's on your mind today?
This is the biggest story of the year, probably of the decade, with this Epstein story.
We're talking about the Epstein-Barr syndrome here?
Yes.
That's the hashtag that should be trending, is Epstein-Barr syndrome.
Yes. When I read that story from Raw Story that Bill Barr visited the prison the day before Epstein supposedly killed himself.
Now, that hasn't been confirmed. That has not been confirmed, Jared. Which is why I didn't include it in my rant. That is a mobster, you know, a former John Gotti associate, saying somebody told me. So, you know, I'd hold back a little bit on that one. I mean, Bill Barr's schedule is, you know, should be relatively public. You know, if somebody within the Justice Department leaked that, yeah, I would take it seriously. But when a former John Gotti mobster, you know, he makes a good point that, you know, people just don't randomly commit suicide in these federal detention centers. I mean, these are places where some of the, you know, the most notorious terrorists in the world, drug traffickers, whatnot, are held in detention, and they're not allowed to commit suicide. He makes a good point to that effect. But when he says that he, you know, somebody told me that Barr visited the prison, that's the point at which I go, okay, wait a minute, this is not something I'm going to report on the air. Back to you, Jared.
Okay, I didn't read that part of the story, but there's too many coincidences going on here.
I'm with you on that.
Barr, his father,
yeah,
hiring Epstein as a high school dropout as a teacher.
Right, in a high school, teaching high school girls. And then the parents start complaining about inappropriate relations with those girls. And a year later, his father resigns from being headmaster of the school.
This is all too weird. With Alex Acosta saying that Epstein is intelligence, I am starting to come to the conclusion that Epstein isn't even dead, that this has all been staged, that if you look at the photos of the corpse of Epstein, you can see that the nose doesn't match with Epstein's.
Yeah, be careful about going down that rabbit hole, Jared. I mean, you know, I think that Epstein being dead is going to cause Barr and Trump to heave a huge sigh of relief. They don't want this guy alive. He can testify to, you know, who did what with whom, including possibly Barr's dad and certainly Donald Trump.
Yeah, that is true. And
so, I mean, let's keep our conspiracy theories within the realm of probable and credible rather than, you know, oh, he's not dead. I mean, you know, there's like John, you know, like Elvis and John Lennon, and I mean, you know, there've been. He's dead. I have no doubt that he's dead.
But what about Robert Maxwell?
Robert Maxwell was probably murdered. He was $4 billion in debt. This is it pronounced Ghislaine? I don't know how to pronounce her first name, but anyhow, his daughter was. Yeah. Robert Maxwell was supposed to be one of the richest men in the world. And when he died, it came out that he was $4 billion in debt, which I think is probably the neighborhood where Donald Trump is right now. And once that came out, of course, that was the end of the road for Robert Maxwell. And his daughter was Jeffrey Epstein's procurer. He supposedly fell overboard from his own yacht. Right.
Because he was Mossad. He was killed.
Well, who knows? And again, you know, Mossad is code for Jewish, which gets you into the anti-Semitic, the anti-Jewish conspiracies. God only knows. God only knows. Although Maxwell himself was Jewish. We'll be back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. The economic news seems to have been eclipsed by people wanting to talk about the Epstein-Barr syndrome. This is amazing stuff. Brian in Palatine, Illinois. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Hey, Tom. It's great to talk to you. First-time caller. I've been listening to you for about 6 years, and you pretty much single-handedly turned me into a progressive. So
Cool.
Yeah. And I just wanted to bring up one thing about the Epstein case. In Michael Wolff's latest book, Siege, it talks about how Mitch McConnell handpicked Bill Barr to, quote, save the Republican Party. So maybe
really?
he knew something about this in advance, about all the Epstein stuff that it was about to come out.
I'm guessing that I didn't realize that Mitch McConnell was the one who recommended Bill Barr. I was wondering who brought him out of cold storage. You know, McConnell has been around Washington D.C. politics long enough to know that Bill Barr was the guy, who fixed the Iran-Contra investigation.
Yeah.
I mean, it was Bill Barr who recommended to George Herbert Walker Bush that he pardon 5 or 6 people, including Ollie North and Elliot Abrams, back in 1992, just 3 weeks before he had to leave the White House because he had lost the election to Bill Clinton. He did all those pardons, and that shut down, that just decapitated the Iran-Contra investigation that would have implicated both Bush and Reagan in high crimes and misdemeanors.
Yeah.
And so it makes perfect sense that, but I doubt that Mitch McConnell saw Epstein coming.
Yeah, it's hard to say either way, but it's kind of funny just how, it's kind of saving the Republican Party from Trump, which is kind of angle on it.
Yeah, it is fascinating, all the ways that these things intersect with each other. Brian, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. Mike in Los Angeles, listening on KPFK. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, yeah, I just believe that Mr. William Cover-Up Barr's immediate firing is the only way Donald Trump can indicate that he was not guilty of raping the 13-year-old.
Yeah.
After the previous alleged suicide attempt, we find out that Epstein has killed himself, no surveillance cameras involved. I mean, this just stinks to high heaven.
Yeah.
Barr is guilty at least of negligent homicide in not keeping this man alive, considering the explosive nature of what he was involved.
Right, and this lawsuit alleging that when she was 13, both Epstein and Trump raped this young woman is still live. That lawsuit is still out there, and this Epstein-Barr connection appears. Well, we'll see if it kills the lawsuit or not, because now it's just a lawsuit against Trump. And Barr is proclaiming that Trump can't be sued, can't be anything. He's the president after all.
Barr should be removed from office by Trump, or he should be impeached if that doesn't happen.
I agree with both those sentiments, but I would say lacking that, and I'd be very surprised if Donald Trump decided that he was going to remove him, and I'd be astonished if Mitch McConnell allowed an impeachment hearing of Barr in the Senate. Lacking that, I think that what this administration needs to do if they want to recover any credibility at all is say that the whole Epstein investigation is going to be conducted by, an independent party, by the equivalent of Ken Starr or Robert Mueller or somebody like that. Because
and on the interest rate things, all these central banks keep cutting interest rates. When the crash comes, they're going to have no tools left.
Well, that was my point. I mean, they're reaching the point where they've got no tools left, and I think that is going to be what provokes the crash. And the crash is simply going to be a continuation of 2007. We're just going to go back to where we were. The system's going to lock up again, and there'll be no way to throw liquidity into it. And then we're into a 3 or 4 year long serious Great Depression kind of Great Depression worldwide. And that's going to lead to war and all kinds of god-awful things. And we could get ahead of this right now by repudiating neoliberalism, but I'm not seeing a lot of countries moving in that direction. Instead, people are moving hard right. Mike, thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for listening to KPFK. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
After the break, I also want to get into how Trump and the Republicans are using the crisis that Reaganomics caused in rural white America to their advantage. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is In Putin's Footsteps, Searching for the Soul of an Empire. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Vince Houghton's Nuking the Moon and Other Intelligence Schemes and Military Plots Left on the Drawing Board. This is Chapter 7, Operation Northwoods. On April 17, 1961, more than 1,400 Cuban exiles forming the Brigada de Asalto 2506
landed on the beaches of Cuba at Playa Girón in the Bahia de Cojinos, the Bay of Pigs. Their mission was to overthrow the regime of Fidel Castro, Cuba's increasingly communist leader, who had himself overthrown the regime of American ally Batista just 2 years before. A communist leader just 90 miles from Key West was a rather painful thorn in the side of the newly inaugurated President John F. Kennedy, and his ouster was considered a high national security priority, as it had been for Kennedy's predecessor, Dwight Eisenhower. The invasion was backed by the U.S. government and the CIA. We can argue why the Bay of Pigs invasion failed until we're blue in the face, and many people still do. For many in the Cuban exile community, the mission failed because JFK refused to give American naval and air support, elements called in for the original plan developed by the Eisenhower administration. Maybe this is true. The problem here is that we begin to descend into the realm of the counterfactuals, the if-onlys and what-ifs, things that we are doing our damnedest to avoid. Look, I've met a lot of the Cubans who took part in that invasion, many of whom are permanently settled in or around Miami, my hometown. They are impressive men, and I wouldn't put anything past them. If they say they could have kicked out Castro with U.S. naval and air support, who am I to argue? But I still will, because things are much more complicated from an intelligence perspective. Despite the lack of air and naval support, and despite the intensity and desire of the Cuban exile forces, it would have been immeasurably difficult to overcome one of the most problematic aspects of the entire invasion. Castro not only knew they were coming, he knew when and where they were coming. A combination of piss-poor information security, or in today's parlance, InfoSec, with the ability of Cuban intelligence to infiltrate the Miami exile community meant that the secret mission to free Cuba of Castro was anything but secret. It's not like this was a huge surprise for the CIA or the U.S. military. The Cuban intelligence service was very good, and some in the exile community had loose lips. In this environment, it was nearly impossible to conduct effective counterintelligence and keep the invasion secret. Most telling of all, the Soviets had literally broadcast their knowledge of the mission 4 days before it happened. On April 13th, Radio Moscow released an English-language newscast in which they predicted an invasion of Cuba by CIA-trained exiles within the week. It seems they were trying to warn us against carrying out the invasion, a type of deterrence through propaganda. Hey, we know you're coming, so perhaps now is not a good time for your secret operation. Clearly, that didn't work. The blowback from the failed mission was significant on multiple levels. More than 100 members of the 2506 Brigade were killed in combat, along with 4 American volunteer pilots from the Alabama Air National Guard, who were contracted by the CIA. Hundreds more in Cuba would be executed in the days and weeks following the invasion, as Castro eliminated anyone suspected of abetting the exiles. More than 1,200 of the brigade would be captured by the Cuban government, and some of those members were subsequently executed. The Kennedy administration was embarrassed by the failed mission. U.S. government looked inept in failing to maintain order even in its own backyard. In the zero-sum game of the Cold War, where victory for one of the superpowers was defeat for the other, this was a huge win for the Soviets. Not to mention that the invasion pushed Castro even more firmly into the Soviet sphere of influence. And as far as the strength of the regime was concerned, the Bay of Pigs invasion did the exact opposite of what was intended. It made Castro's regime more powerful than ever before. The operation was a great political victory for the Cubans at home and abroad. Castro was a hero in the eyes of his people for defeating the Yankee invasion and was able to consolidate his power. The fiasco also elevated the Cuban government to a newfound global status, transforming communist Cuba from an aggrieved little country to an equal in the eyes of the world. In fact, Argentinian physician turned Cuban revolutionary Ernesto Che Guevara actually thanked the United States for the failed invasion. The CIA bore the brunt of the blame for the failed mission. President Kennedy fired CIA Director Allen Dulles, along with Deputy Director Charles Cabell and Deputy Director for Plans Richard M. Bissell, the 3 men who made up the core of the agency's leadership, particularly in the realm of covert action. Kennedy also removed, at least temporarily, major paramilitary operations from the purview of the CIA. For more than a decade, CIA had been the agency with primary responsibility for paramilitary covert operations, but now it was benched. Into the void leapt the U.S. military. In June 1961, about 2 months after the Bay of Pigs, President Kennedy approved National Security Action Memoranda 55, 56, and 57, which codified the shift in paramilitary responsibility from the CIA to the Pentagon. Nothing else really changed.
The U.S. government was still looking for ways to oust Castro from power, just through a different government agency. By autumn, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations, Brigadier General Edward Lansdale, a legendary intelligence officer, or infamous, or both, depending on your perspective, was asked to brainstorm ideas to get rid of Fidel. He didn't disappoint. In February 1962, Lansdale provided a document titled Possible Actions to Provoke, Harass, or Disrupt Cuba. Some of the actions are pretty good, some are quite silly, and some are downright abhorrent. The book is Nuking the Moon by Vince Houghton.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Delivers phone service for business. Learn more at phone.com using the code TOM, T-H-O-M. Wow. Twitter is just going nuts on the Epstein-Barr syndrome, which is a great hashtag, Epstein-Barr syndrome, because it's like Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Barr, Bill Barr's dad, Bill Barr his law firm defending. He wasn't personally involved, but his law firm was involved in was the defense law firm for Epstein. Scott Walker tweets this. He says the Epstein murder story is like a rejected high school movie script for an intro to film class. Too many overused cliches. Next thing we'll find out, zombies are deceptively rapid walkers, and a dying man whispers the secret in his last breath. That's what's scary, and no one cares. Tiberius Gratius says, I wish I could take credit, but I heard Cover Up General on, and then he mentions a couple of radio shows. You heard it on my show. I wrote several op-eds about this, back when Bill Barr was first nominated to be Attorney General, how William Safire, who was, arguably back in the day, back in the 90s, in the 80s and the early 90s, he had this column in the New York Times called On Language, and I loved to read I'm an English geek, right? My mom graduated with a degree in English from MSU. She was a total English nut, and we had good grammar in our house. Damn it! It was, and so I was going back. I was researching Bill Barr. When Trump nominated him, it turns out Mitch McConnell apparently promoted this idea. And what I found were all these old columns in the New York Times by William Safire calling him Cover-Up General instead of Attorney General, because he was the Attorney General for George Herbert Walker Bush in 1992, and he was the one who helped Bush engineer the Iran-Contra cover-up, pardoning Ollie North and pardoning Elliott Abrams and a few other people, and shutting down the investigation. Lawrence Walsh, who was in charge of that investigation, was screaming bloody murder about this. I mean, look at the New York Times front page for the day, either the day before, the day of, or the day after Christmas of 1992. That's when Barr did this. And it was just screaming headlines. And Safire called him Cover-Up General Barr. It's getting very, very strange. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I guess I'm really interested in the connection between these, the financialized economy and people like Jeffrey Epstein, and how they are able to amass such fortunes from, just obscurity.
Well, keep in mind, he worked at Bear Stearns, and then he worked at J.P. Morgan Chase.
Right.
Well, only it was J.P. Morgan back in the day.
He worked there. He was not a billionaire there. In other words, they probably have connections with that. But just the whole idea of, to me, these people are parasites. They're just making money off of the rest of us by just taking it out of our pockets. I don't see that they increase the actual gross national product. They remove it from our wallets. And, why do we have this kind of system? I know we have neoliberalism, but how it has evolved over the years with, the federal government enabling them to be able to do this. And also, there are other people like Paul Singer. They basically buy the debt of sovereign countries and put them in debt servitude for the rest of their life. And I think that this is the kind of thing that Jeffrey Epstein had done, and it's a great way of making money for doing nothing.
Yeah, and the reason I mentioned J.P. Morgan Chase and and whatnot is not to suggest, and Bear Stearns, not to suggest that these companies played any role in Epstein's crimes or anything like that.
Right,
but rather to say that they might have taught him how to use this financialization of our marketplace to turn himself into a billionaire.
Like for instance, one of them, the commodities market, they were able to purchase the wheat market here after, they trashed the economy in terms of, real estate markets and the banks. And they did the same thing. They made the price of wheat, they made it go up. They made the market unstable simply so that they could do, casino-type capitalism where they just pull off,
sure.
Money out of the economy.
It doesn't. That's what Enron did with electricity.
Yes. I can't remember the name of the company that. Goldman Sachs.
Yeah.
So it's just it's like a freak show. Really, we've have to get out of this, and I don't know how to get out of it myself, or what to suggest, because I think that the economy is going to tank again. Obviously.
Yeah, I think it already. I don't think that we ever got out of the recession.
It's just all funny money that has been
right. We just got out of what was apparently a depression. By the way, John, they're referring to Epstein in the headlines as a financier. Why not call him a bankster?
Bankster, or maybe we should call them welfare kings.
Yeah.
They are welfare kings.
Yeah.
They are people that are sucking off of you, me, your children, and even the next generation. They're destroying the lives of people throughout the third world. And this is the kind of economy, thanks to the Republicans, thanks to Ronald Reagan. And every time somebody, says, "Oh, he was such a great president," I want to barf.
Yeah.
Living through all of this.
Yeah. He destroyed this country.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry.
No, it's all good, John. It's all good. Yeah, Reagan destroyed this country. I mean, you just look around you, and his racialization of politics by doubling down on Nixon's Southern strategy has also brought us a lot of the crisis that we have right now, and I would argue brought us Donald Trump. Margie in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin. Hey, Margie, what's up?
Hi. I'm going to read you something that is going to send a chill down your boat.
It has to be very brief if you're going to read it.
It's very brief. Okay. This was in Freight Waves, which is a trucking industry magazine, dated July 11th. The trucking industry is officially in a recession, according to data tracked by ACT Research. We've had 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth.
Wow.
We are already in a recession.
Yeah.
The trucking industry is always the first indicator.
Right.
And I will tell you, it is miserable out here. Rates are down. Finding any freight is horrible.
You're a trucker, Margie?
A couple of things. Yes, I am. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One, the closing of the auto plants, and 2, the weather. Food.
Oh, interesting.
Food is that we're supposed to be contracted to do 10 loads of corn a week. We've done 3.
And that's because of the flooding across the Midwest from climate change?
The flooding and climate change.
Wow.
There are fields out there that are still lakes, Tom.
Yeah, I've seen the pictures. Wow. So it's like a double whammy. It's all coming together at one time. And Margie, you're absolutely right. Trucking is one of the most famous leading indicators. Trucking and housing are the 2 big leading indicators.
I would strongly suggest you read the article. It will terrify you.
Yeah. Okay. Margie, thank you. Thanks for the thoughts. Patrick in San Antonio. Hey, Patrick, what's up?
Yeah, I was calling in regards to the you guys made a comment earlier about Michael Wolff's book, and that.
One of the callers mentioned
Trump
that.
And Epstein. Yeah. Back in 2004, it appears that Epstein went to Trump with a real estate opportunity, and according to Michael Wolff, in that book, it says that Trump bought it out from under him, paid $5 million than what Epstein was going to pay. And it appears at that time they had a falling out. Epstein came to him and said that he was going to expose him as a financial fraud. And at that point, 2005, a year later, Epstein was under under investigation there for pedophilia.
Interesting.
So I found that interesting. Another thing, too, on the Fusion GPS, they looked into the relationship, and according to Fusion GPS, they couldn't find a significant relationship between Trump and Epstein.
Yeah, except that there's pictures of them together. Epstein introduced Trump to Melania. I mean,
all before 2005. All before 2004. I think those quotes and those pictures.
Oh, so what you're saying is that's ever since Trump basically ripped off Epstein's real estate opportunity and screwed him, that they haven't had any contact. Well, that makes sense. I mean,
Yeah. And then you can run with this one. A Russian bought it from Trump for $96 million. So
gee, I'm shocked.
Take that for what you want. Well,
shocked.
But, yeah.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you very much, Mark in Valley, Washington. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Well, first, I would say Reagan at least put us on the path that we ended up at right now.
No doubt about it.
I'm assuming you know who Malcolm Nance is, and he's got a quote that I love, and he says, "Coincidence takes a lot of planning."
There you go. Well, I mean, some people are really pushing this. There's a BLM posted over on Democratic Underground this morning that Trump separates migrant children to serve global network of pedophiles. Many will be sex trafficked. Others will be forced into labor jobs to earn their keep. This is the narrative activists need to adopt. I think it is important to point out that hundreds of these children who are separated from their parents are lost. Their parents have no idea where they are, and neither does the government. And but to say that that's part of some giant conspiracy between Trump and Epstein and whatnot to have, to continue sex trafficking, that's pushing it too far. But I get your point about coincidence, and it's a point very well made. Thank you, Rick in Richmond, California. Hey, Rick, what's up?
Yeah, I called today, Tom, on the apprenticeship programs here in our country.
So you want to talk about our economy?
Pardon me?
You're talking about the economy here.
Okay, well, you had mentioned union programs that are shrinking,
right?
And one of the things that is happening right now is the feds are attacking the accredited apprenticeship programs, and it's backed by the ABC. They're attacking us, saying that merit systems are the way to go, which means they're not schooled.
Right.
They have no accredited apprenticeship program in our country right now, and they're attacking the very one that we do have, and that's with the building trades.
Right, and this is, for people who don't know what we're talking about, we did a whole program on this when I was in Chicago a month or two ago, and, with a bunch of union guys talking about this. Unions have, forever, I mean, through literally my entire lifetime, unions have provided basically in-house training programs to certify people and bring them up to a skill level where they're employable and at a good wage and in a good job. And the Department of Labor, the Trump Department of Labor, is trying to assert that that's unnecessary. That if somebody just goes to a for-profit online college and buys a course from Trump University, that now they're certified or now they're good enough to be hired, and that employers can ignore the agreements that they have with the unions. And this is one of the real value adds that unions have, and not just adding value to union membership, but adding value to our economy.
Yes, I want to ask you one question, and then I'm done. The amount of immigrants that Russia sends to our country, as compared to the amount of immigrants that are at our borders now, is it big, larger, people coming in from Russia, or larger from our South American brothers? You're
talking legal immigration?
Yes.
Yeah, legal immigration. Well, actually, illegal or illegal, I don't know. I don't know the answer to the question. I'm guessing that it's much smaller. And one of the reasons why legal immigration from Russia would be much harder, or illegal immigration, from Russia would be much harder than illegal immigration from south of the border, is that if you live in Russia, you have to get a visa to visit the United States. And most people who are here illegally, the highest rate is actually among Canadians. Most people who are here illegally come here on a visitor's pass, essentially, and then just, overstay their visa. They just ignore the visa. So, Rick, thanks for the call. And that would be very difficult for a Russian because they, getting the visa is this whole song and dance, right? It would be difficult for Eastern Europeans. It would be a little more difficult for Chinese unless they came in, anybody would come in completely under the radar. We'll be back. It's 48 minutes past the hour. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in the news of the day and the Epstein-Barr syndrome hashtag. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Damon in Las Vegas. Hey, Damon, what's up?
Yeah, I want everyone to hear me what I want to say because I don't think you guys get it, and I had no idea until what I'm about to say. So I'm going to get to the point. I have a friend. He's a white man. He's 38. I'm 45. I'm a black man. We've been friends for a little while. And one day, I think the 16-year-old kid was found dead at one of the containment centers, the camps. And I said to him, Trump is, SOB kind of thing. I don't know really exactly what I say. And he went off. Trump is the greatest person on earth. So, yeah, I had no idea. We was friends. He never, not once I really even thought he was injured Trump. So anyway, when Epstein died this weekend, he sent me this text message that Trump is going to kill them all kind of stuff. You get what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. And he's glad that Trump whacked Epstein. I don't think the average person gets it. We're not going to, here's my point, we're not going to turn any of them.
Oh, no, I get that. These people have been completely brainwashed. Louise and I started last night, started watching this show on Showtime, The Loudest Voice in the Room, which is the story of Roger Ailes and the creation of Fox News. And it's absolutely shocking. Basically, Roger Ailes sits down and says, what we're going to do is, we're going to create a network that programs to rural white people. We're going to sell it all as patriotism, and we're going to promote this neoliberal agenda. Fox News has, since the 90s, has been selling to rural white people the idea that Reaganomics and racial hatred and all this other stuff are good for them, and it's killing them, in fact.
And I just want everybody to listen to me that says we can convert. I've been friends with this guy for a couple of years. I have never once heard a racial thought. I never heard him say nothing about Trump until about 2 weeks ago. Things with Epstein this week. He's talking about he wants to kill all the. Listen to what he told me. I know you got time. I got to get off. But he said that Trump is going to have everybody on CNN executed. It's just stuff I had no idea.
This is the QAnon theory. The QAnon theory is that Trump is taking
about that too.
Yeah, that Trump is going to take on the deep state, and that he's going to have in the very end, it's sort of like a Jesus moment. Only Jesus with a machine gun. He's going to have all the bad people brought out, and he's going to have them publicly executed. And who would think that that's a good thing, right? Publicly executing people. That's like what Robespierre did in the French Revolution. It's what the Bolsheviks did in Russia in 1917 or 1919, whatever the year was. The Night of the Long Knives. It's what Hitler did. When the guy in charge of your political system starts executing people because of their politics, you don't want to praise that. Go ahead, Damon. I'm sorry.
So, Mr. I'm sorry, man. I just want you to know, everybody out there who thinks we can convert this person before this all happened was a good friend of mine. I've been to his house. We drank together, talked boo-boo together. His ex-wife is black, believe that or not.
Yeah.
I had no clue that what I just heard for the last 2 weeks.
Well, you don't have to be a screaming racist to agree with Trump on a whole bunch of other things. But it helps.
None of them.
But it helps. Damon, thanks. Thanks for sharing your story with us. It's a good one. I appreciate it. I appreciate the call. We'll be back. Amazing stuff. Thank you, Joyce. We'll be right back. It's 52 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. This Morgan Ford writing for supplychaindive.com. ACT research showed 2 quarters of negative sector growth. DAT reported a 50% decline in year-over-year freight spot market loads. And the Cass Freight Index for May 2019 saw declining freight shipment levels. This is what the trucker caller earlier, when she called in and she said, you know, we were supposed to pick up 10 loads of corn and we're only picking up 3 because of the climate change, you know, has wiped out the Midwest. You know, on top of that, you've got basically this, we're in a recession. So, yeah, fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff. Where do we go here? Steve in Park Ridge, Illinois. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, I heard your comment about the Roger Ailes loudest voice.
Yeah,
my wife and I have we've watched 6 of the 7 episodes, and I would commend that to any of your listeners.
Mm-hmm.
That's not really why I called, though. I don't know if anyone has posited this, but with the Epstein fortune, how much of that money was made trafficking these girls? I have a feeling that these weren't freebies to the customers, and I have a feeling it was like a high-level call girl prostitution ring.
I think that it went beyond that, Steve. I don't think that Jeffrey Epstein was making money trafficking young girls. I think he was using it as enticement and blackmail. I think he was saying to these wealthy and powerful men, here, have sex with so-and-so, and not telling them that he was videotaping it or filming it, not telling them that he was keeping records of it, not telling them that there were security cameras going in and out of his houses all those years. This is the stuff that Bill Barr now has in his possession and somehow has just dropped off the radar screen of the American media. The American media was all over this when Epstein's house was raided a few weeks ago and he was first arrested. They was like, oh my God, we found the videotapes, we found the movies. And that was, you know, Barr comes out and says, I'm going to recuse myself. And then Barr has a meeting with Donald Trump. And the day later, he says, I'm not going to recuse myself. I'm unrecusing myself. I'm going to supervise this. I'm going to take possession of all these dirty films and things. And I think Epstein was basically, you know, if he could get, you know, a billionaire to sleep with a girl who was underage, whether they knew she was underage or not, Epstein would come along after the fact and say, oh, by the way, she was only 16 or 15 or whatever. And you really do want to invest $1 billion with me, don't you? Oh, yes, sir, Mr. Epstein. Absolutely. Here's $1 billion. Please make me some money. And Epstein makes a little profit for them, keeps a lot for himself, and everybody walks away happy.
I think your thought on that is even a bigger moneymaker.
Yeah.
Because you could extort for hundreds of thousands of dollars versus, you know, the $10,000-$20,000 for the one-time tryst. So
right.
I think you're right on.
No, I think this is. I'm guessing that, you know, out of a single illegal sexual encounter between you know, a wealthy. I mean, we're talking, you know, people worth hundreds of millions of dollars or even billions of dollars between a wealthy person and one of Epstein's girls, that out of one single encounter, Epstein could have made tens of millions of dollars by getting those wealthy people. Keep in mind, Jeffrey Epstein was running investment funds. Those wealthy people put their money in his funds because they don't want him to reveal their sexual activity. And then he makes millions of dollars off those funds. And this appears to be how he made his money. I mean, we don't know for sure that there was this kind of implied blackmail element to it, but I think absolutely. Steve, thank you for the call, and thanks for listening to WCPT. We'll continue this conversation and more. I want to get into, you know, what Reaganomics has done to middle America, to rural America, how this war between rural America and urban America is being fanned by Donald Trump, and who's really responsible for the death of rural America.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is No Visible Bruises, What We Don't Know About Domestic Violence Can Kill Us by Rachel Louise Snyder. I'm reading from the preface. This is page 4. Suzanne and I exchanged small talk on her brother's driveway that day in 2010. She and the family were still in preparation and packing mode for their annual camping vacation into the hinterlands of Maine. And Suzanne had been greeted by her brother Andre with a long shopping list. She had told me she worked for a domestic violence agency in town and that they had recently developed a new program that she was calling the Domestic Violence High Risk Team. Their primary aim was simple, she said. We try to predict domestic violence homicides before they happen so we can prevent them. It sounded immediately implausible. So implausible, in fact, that I thought I'd misheard some elemental piece of it. Predict, I remember saying? You said predict domestic violence homicides? I had come across domestic violence in my reporting over the years, not only in Cambodia, but also in places like Afghanistan, Niger, and Honduras. But it had never been a focus for me. Instead, it was always adjacent to whatever other story I was writing, so much so that it was practically banal. The young girls jailed for love crimes in Kabul, the Indian child brides who gave interviews only in front of the men who controlled them, the Tibetan women forcibly sterilized by the Chinese government, the teenage brides in Niger cast from their villages after post-pregnancy fistulas made them pariahs, the Romanian women forced to give to birth multiple children under Ceausescu and who now in their early 30s were grandmothers fated to poverty, the Cambodian street workers beaten and gang-raped for weekend sport by well-heeled Khmer teenagers. All of these women in every country were brutalized and controlled by men as a matter of routine. Men made the rules, primarily through physical violence. It was there, lurking in practically every story I'd ever covered around the world, a shadowy background so obvious I didn't even have to ask about it most of the time. It was as common as rain. Until that moment in the driveway with Suzanne Dubas, if I thought of domestic violence in the United States at all, I saw it as an unfortunate fate for the unlucky few, a matter of bad choices and cruel environments. A woman hardwired to be hurt, a man hardwired to hurt. But I never envisioned it as a social ill, an epidemic we can actually do something about. Now here was Susan Dubas talking about preventative measures for a type of violence that, for the first time, I saw operating along a continuum. The young girl in India married as a child, the Tibetan woman sterilized, the Afghan woman jailed, the housewife in Massachusetts brutalized by her husband. They all shared a common privation, what domestic violence victims across the world lacked: agency in their own lives. The forces that brought a Cambodian prostitute to the brink of death were the same forces that killed thousands of women and children and men, but mostly women and children, across America and the entire globe every year. An average, in fact, of 137 women each and every day are killed by intimate partner or familial violence across the globe, and this does not include men or children. Everything in my body suddenly came alive that day. I saw all the faces of women around the world from over 2 decades of work, and I realized how rarely I'd gazed inward at my own country, at what we got wrong and what it meant. The universality of domestic violence and how it crisscrosses geographical, cultural, and linguistic barriers. Maybe all those other stories were in preparation for the day that I'd meet Paul Monson and look at the mountains from his living room windows. I ended up following Suzanne to the farmer's market and then to the grocery store and then to the liquor store as she prepped for her camping trip. I helped her carry ice and peaches and hamburger meat. I asked question after question while she drove and while her mother Pat sat in the passenger seat, chiming in here and there. How did it work? How many have you stopped? What else can you predict? My questions were vast and endless. Like many people who hold a casual acquaintance with a problem, I believed all the common assumptions. That if things were bad enough, victims would just leave. That restraining orders solved the problem. And that if a victim didn't show up to renew a restraining order, the problem had been solved. That going to a shelter was an adequate response for victims and their children. That violence inside the home was something private, unrelated to other forms of violence, perhaps most notably mass shootings. That a lack of visible injury signaled a lack of seriousness. And perhaps most of all, that unless we stand at the receiving end of a punch, such violence had nothing to do with us at all. Over the next few years, Suzanne Dubas and her colleague Kelly Dunn patiently taught me about the scope and history of an issue that still today is too often hidden. I learned why past approaches had failed and what we could do more effectively today. Between 2000 and 2006, 3,200 American soldiers were killed.
During that same period, domestic homicide in the United States claimed 10,600 lives. This figure is likely an underestimate, as it was pulled from the FBI's supplementary homicide reports, which gather data from local police departments, and participation is voluntary. 20 people in the United States are assaulted every minute by their partners. Former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan called violence against women and girls the most shameful human rights violation, and the World Health Organization called it a global health problem of epidemic proportions. A study put out by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime cited 50,000 women around the world were killed by partners or family members in 2017 alone. 50,000 women. The UNODC report called Home the most dangerous place for women. The book No Visible Bruises by Rachel Louise Snyder.
You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
It's free speech.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. This hour of our program is brought to you, of the Thom Hartmann Program, brought to you by Phone.com. Phone.com delivers phone service for business. You can learn more at Phone.com with the code TOM, T-H-O-M, Phone.com. Wow. We have been talking about Jeffrey Epstein and his association. Having his first real job was teaching high school girls. He was hired by Bill Barr's dad and all this other stuff. Just the whole story gets really, really weird. And I got into it well, we've all been digging through this over the last hour. I would like and I also, in the last hour, was talking at some length about the economy and how it looks like the economy is unraveling. This bank in Denmark now offering mortgages where you pay back less money than the bank gives you to begin with. And literally negative interest rates. And, you know, Trump basically pushing Jay Powell in a direction that could end up there. How, you know, the keepers of our economy can't hold it together. So we'll continue our conversation about those things. But I want to go beyond that and get into what Reaganism, also known as neoliberalism, keep in mind the Reagan administration negotiated the NAFTA treaty. The Reagan administration helped bring us, you know, so-called free trade, global free trade, the World Trade Organization, all these kind of things. I know Bill Clinton gets blamed for it, but it was Reagan who put this thing together, and then George Herbert Walker Bush actually finished the negotiations and came up with the final NAFTA. So whether it is the so-called free trade aspect of neoliberalism, whether it is the union busting aspect of neoliberalism, keep in mind this was going on in the European Union, or at least in the UK, with Margaret Thatcher starting in 1978. It started here with Reagan in 1980. And now, you know, with the Eurozone, it's spread across the European continent. This idea that neoliberalism is the way of the future. This is the way economies should work. And these neoliberal policies have just decimated economy after economy after economy. The neoliberal idea that the way you stimulate an economy is by giving more money to rich people. I mean, back in the 19th century, in the United States, this was referred to as horse and sparrow economics. If you feed the horses more oats, there'll be more undigested oats in their poop, and the sparrows will eat those and get fatter. And this was back in the days when, literally, in the late 1800s, when this was being sold to the American people, is why we need, to help out the rich people and keep wages down. Because the more you give to rich people, the better ultimately the sparrows, the little people, are. And this was back in the day when, horses were the principal means of transportation, and pretty much everybody had seen sparrows pecking away at horse poop looking for undigested seeds. Today, most people don't, say it's horse and sparrow economics. You go, what? So you have to say, oh, it's trickle-down economics. This was, Ronald Reagan's contribution to it. Trickle-down economics turn working people into peons and tell them it's raining. So this has been turned into an art form, by and large, by neoliberal parties in Europe, by the conservatives in the UK, and by the Republicans here in the United States. And, Trump is one of the leading advocates of neoliberal policy. And so now you've got, keep in mind, neoliberal policy is something that is beloved by very rich people, not just marginally wealthy people, but very rich people, because neoliberal policy makes them richer and richer and richer. We have seen since the late 80s over $17 trillion in additional wealth go to the top 5% of Americans, while the bottom 80% of Americans have lost over $1 trillion in personal wealth. It's a massive transfer of wealth from middle class and working families to the very rich. That's neoliberalism. So the really rich people, like people who can afford to live in the Hamptons, right, where a starter home is a few $1,000,000, are upset. These poor snowflakes. This and raw story here. Supporters of President Donald Trump who live in the wealthy Hamptons in New York bitterly complained to the New York Post over the weekend that they can't openly declare their allegiance to the president for fear of reprisals and boycotts to their businesses. One boutique owner from Southampton told the Post, for example, that Hampton Trump fans have to remain in the closet because it's like you have this disease and people want to run away from you. A Trump-loving builder from West Hampton, meanwhile, tells the paper that he actually fears getting beat up or worse if he publicly acknowledges how much he loves the president. A Sag Harbor art consultant says, we live out in the land of the First Amendment, but if you want to stay in business out here, you have to keep your opinions to yourself. We are hitting a very dark and strange place in this country. Oh, these poor snowflakes, these poor rich people. They're concerned that Donald Trump has exposed neoliberalism as a scam that was sold to white America as, through the vehicle of racism, essentially. And this is what's going on. The white rural population, the majority white population living in rural America, has been wiped out by neoliberalism, by Reaganism, by Thatcherism. The opioid crisis, falling populations, job losses, rising suicide rates. Trump is destroying rural America. And it's pretty bad. 20% of the population, 46 million Americans, are being left behind in, quote, middle America. Axios newsletter today talking about these communities face increasingly high barriers to education, wealth, and health. If you live in rural America right now, if you were born, grew up, or now reside in rural America, throughout your life, this is from Axios, throughout your life you have been more susceptible to poverty, lower education, illness, and even death than your counterparts who live in cities. And yet, Fox News keeps telling you, you're the real Americans. You're the ones the Republicans care about if you live in rural America. All right, this is the pitch of Fox News. No, Republicans don't care about you if you live in rural America. Republicans just want to rip you off and give your money to fat cat financiers and people like Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump. As a kid, if you grew up in rural America, chances are you live farther away from a doctor or hospital and got less exercise. You're more likely to live in a school desert, having to travel long distances to get to school. And if you did get a college degree, you're far more likely to be deeply in debt than kids who grew up in the city. As an adult, if you live in rural America right now, as a result, in my opinion, of neoliberal policies of Reaganism, continued by, 3 Republican and 2 Democratic presidents, we are still operating in the neoliberal environment. We have not gone back to Keynesian economics. Keynesian economics was stopped in the 1980s by Reagan. It built the middle class in America. It rebuilt the middle class in Europe between the 1930s and the 1980s. But Reagan put a stop to this. And the result of this, very straightforward. If you're living in rural America, you're more likely to suffer from obesity. Now, this is white rural America. Why? Right? You're more likely to suffer from obesity. You're more likely to suffer from mental health issues. You're more likely to have diabetes. You're more likely to get cancer. And you're more likely to get addicted to opioids. You're more likely to know people who committed suicide. Your community's economy still hasn't recovered from the 2008 recession. If you're older, you're more likely to die a preventable death. And you probably don't have a place to grow old near your family and friends. And, this has got white people in America freaked out. The rural white people that Fox News preaches to and right-wing hate radio preaches to. In every rural community in America, you can get right-wing hate radio. You can't get progressive radio, but you can get right-wing hate radio. And, and Trump is like trying to sell to these folks, these poor people who are wearing these maggot hats, he's trying to sell the idea that it's all about race. Mike Mail's writing over in the Los Angeles Times. Now, this was back in 2017. This was 2 years ago, after Trump had just become president. At a recent rally in Ohio, Trump used lurid language to claim that gang members slice and dice beautiful girls like animals. Last week, his administration strengthened its crackdown on sanctuary jurisdictions. It's obvious to anyone who's listening that when Trump talks about this terrifying other, he's really talking about non-white people. So this guy, Mike Mail's this author for the Los Angeles Times, he looks at the CDC statistics from 2011 to 2015 for 2,962 counties, 99% of the U.S. population, at the rates of homicides, guns killing, illicit drug fatalities, and finds that all three of those things are highest in the United States, 2,962 counties. They are highest in those counties where 9 out of 10 residents are white and where President Trump won the 2016 election. Where is it safest for white people in America? White Americans who are safest from such deaths are those who live in racially diverse areas such as Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago, where 2/3 of residents are non-white, where millions of immigrants live, and where voters favored Hillary Clinton. White Americans are 8 times more likely to die from illicit drug overdoses than from murder. And when whites are murdered anywhere in the country, the murderer is 5 times more likely to be white than non-white. White Americans who live in predominantly white and Trump voting counties are 50% more likely to die from murder, 51% more likely to die from gun violence, 50% more likely to die from drug overdoses than whites who live in diverse and Democratic voting counties. The more white and Republican a county is, the greater the risk for white Americans. Something you will not hear on Fox News. Meanwhile, the evangelicals are starting to wake up. But what's waking them up? Is obscenity. This is insane. Paul Hardesty, he's a Republican congressman from Greenville, North Carolina, from rural West Virginia. And when Trump gave his rally in Greenville the other day, the one where they had the chant, send her back, he used the word damn preceded by the word God twice. Once in reference to ISIS people and once in reference to a rich guy. And because he said, gee damn, right? I don't think it's illegal to say this word on the air, but I just don't like it. Because he said this twice in his speech, this congressman, Paul Hardesty, this Republican congressman from West Virginia, has gotten multiple complaints from evangelicals. Now, these are people who never, no problem with Donald Trump being, basically, as this poster over Democratic Underground, Def Elect says, a lying, stealing philanderer who's never shown an ounce of decency, whose politics hurt the least among us, who stole from his own charity, who mocks and insults and attacks, can't even quote the Bible properly. None of that bothers them. But you say GD? Oh, no, we can't have that. That's taking the Lord's name in vain.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So it's all starting to fall apart. for Donald Trump? Or is it? What do you think? We'll be back with your calls after this. And welcome back. And let's get our call screen software up here and see who's on the line. John in Seattle. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Tom, thanks. This, I think, ties in both to free speech and the neoliberal Trump administration. I don't know if you've covered this, but the Trump administration in late June issued a unilateral contract with EPA, the union that represents EPA employees, and the contract was based on, basically it cripples the union, and the contract was based on not negotiation, but the Trump administration just issued a unilateral contract with the union and said,
right. So take it or leave it.
Leave it. Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that. I do know that, with both EPA and I believe with Interior, that they moved their scientists out to somewhere in the Midwest. I think it was Kansas City, and said
I think they haven't moved scientists out of EPA, but of course the Trump administration doesn't recognize climate change, global warming, whatever you want to call it, and they also have failed to recognize science in a major decision to keep a pesticide chlorpyrifos that causes brain damage in children.
Well, and they also just denied the request. I believe it was the request of one of the agencies to put a warning label on Roundup, on glyphosate. Saying that it has an association with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Well, yeah, the company's position, and I think EPA's position is still the same. Glyphosate does not cause cancer. Now, that doesn't mean that Roundup doesn't cause cancer, because Roundup, the legal theory is that Roundup has the formulations have other ingredients that have contributed to the cancer.
Interesting, yeah, but this it has been adjudicated. I mean, we're talking multiple multi-million-dollar judgments. John, thank you for the call. Thanks for good points all. Morris in Long Beach. Hey, Morris, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Hey, Professor, we're talking about sex trafficking now. A guy named David Vine, I know you know the name. He's got a book out called Base Nation. Nobody participates in sex trafficking like the United States government or the United States military. But my question is, which institution do you think is going to step up on this Epstein murder, straight up murder? Come on. Is it going to be the Department of Justice? Will it be the FBI? Somebody.
Well, wait a minute. Bill Barr runs the Department of Justice, and the Department of Justice runs the FBI. Doesn't that kind of answer your question?
Okay, let me get back with you later on.
Okay, I didn't mean to shut you down, Morris. I mean, continue your thought train there.
Man, I mean,
who else is going to look into this, though? He died in federal custody, so this is up to the feds, and the Department of Justice is pretty much the entire federal police agencies. They're all under Bill Barr's supervision. So, and Bill Barr is now sitting on all these videotapes of wealthy, powerful men having sex with, Jeffrey Epstein's underage girls.
After the way that guy misrepresented the Mueller report,
all right.
Jesus. Okay, let me let you go, my brother.
Yeah, okay. Thanks a lot, Morris. Good to hear from you. Always good to hear from you. We'll be back in just a minute. It's 22 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Wild times here at Dalton High, Bill Barr's dad's old high school, where he hired Jeffrey Epstein to teach teenage girls math. Very strange. We'll be back. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and boy, what an amazing time, right? What an amazing time we live in. Ross in Olympia, Washington. Hey, Ross, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I think it would be a foolish not to take a look at Epstein.
Ross, you either need to step out of the bathroom or take me off speaker.
Is this better?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I think it would be a mistake to just look at this as a sex for sale scandal. It's basically a honey trap, and you got to take a look at who Epstein was working for.
Oh, well, that's maybe where he was working for. I'll let you riff on that in just a second, Ross. But the point that I made in the previous hour was that I don't think that Epstein was making money supplying girls to wealthy and powerful men via the girls themselves. I think what he was doing was, you hook a billionaire. You want Jeffrey Epstein was running investment funds. He worked at Bear Stearns, then he worked at J.P. Morgan Chase, then he went on his own. And so if he could say to the one, and he doesn't have to say it out loud or explicitly, right? I mean, this all happens with a wink and a nod. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry, I just learned that girl that you slept with at my mansion last week was only 15. And so I'll do my best to keep that under wraps. By the way, would you like to invest $1 billion in this new fund I just opened? Oh, sure, Jeffrey. Here you go. Take $1 billion. And, I'll get you back 1 or 2%. No problem. Oh, 1 or 2% is wonderful. Even though the fund is returning 5%, but Epstein's skimming off the top. And this is how he got rich. This is my opinion. This is my conspiracy theory, as it were. Ross, yours?
Well, I think that he would have been making more money by selling that information to different nation states. Most likely Mossad.
No, well, Israel is not huge in the investment business. I mean, if you're selling information to foreign nation states that have relationships with their bankers, it would far more likely be England or Germany. But this is the second time somebody's mentioned Mossad. I mean, this whole right-wing theory. The reason that the guys who were chanting in Charlottesville were chanting "Jews will not replace us," is they were running this, and the reason why this crazy guy walked into the synagogue and shot a bunch of Jews was because of this right-wing theory that the Jews in America were funding the caravans, and Trump was screaming about the caravans, right? This so-called replacement theory. And this is the definition of anti-Semitism. And this is the kind of stuff that leads to pogroms. I mean, this is horrible, horrible stuff. And please realize where this is coming from before you even think about repeating that kind of a story. We'll be back. It's 27 minutes past the hour. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Talk media for the sane among us.
This is
our selection today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is This Land, How Cowboys, Capitalism, and Corruption Are Ruining the American West by Christopher Ketchum. This is from Chapter 1. It's about halfway through the chapter. He's talking about Bernard DeVoto. DeVoto was the first major historian of the West who was also an environmentalist and an activist, the first chronicler of what Wallace Stenger called the West's curious desire to rape itself. DeVoto was a Westerner raised in Utah. He suffered in the provincialism and intolerance of Mormon country, went east to study, and then teach at Harvard, settled in Cambridge,
but never forgot the beauty of his native ground. Loving the land and history, said a magazine profile, but loathing the society. His histories, novels, criticism, his essays in Harper's Magazine where for 20 years he wrote the oldest column in American journalism, Easy Chair, pointed always west. His trilogy, published in the 1940s, The Year of Decision, Across the Wide Missouri, and The Course of Empire, garnered the Pulitzer, the Bancroft, and the National Book Award. Widely celebrated, DeVoto used his position to become his generation's most outspoken defender of the public lands. He called the West a plundered province, a resource colony for corporations and absentee landlords who practiced, quote, an economy of liquidation. He was broad in his assault on the liquidators. He went after the timbermen, the mining companies, the stockmen, the cattle barons, the oilmen and gasmen, the overgrazers, the deforesters, the denuders, the profiteers of gold rushes and grass rushes. He named the bankers and congressmen who abetted the plundering, the Western hogs, he called them. They've been busy for a century laying waste to the West. Long before the public domain was vested with any permanence legally in the hands of the American people, before there was a consideration of the land itself or any environmental ethic, the West had been torn up, beaten down, subjected to the greed and profligacy of the commodity users. Ironically, the users, in their race to liquidate, helped drive the creation of the public land system we know today, as they proved the need for federal stewardship to stop their abuses. Massive timber frauds in the 19th century, the largest land frauds seen in the West, led directly to the establishment of the Forest Service in the 20th century, its purpose to stop deforestation. Out-of-control cattle numbers in the steppe, overgrazing that turned the fragile soil to dust, led directly to the federal grazing regulatory system that eventually became the BLM. When in 1946 the commodity users conspired to destroy the public land system, the system in which DeVoto saw the only hope for Western conservation and preservation, he stood to oppose them. Quote, he was the first conservationist in nearly half a century, except for Franklin D. Roosevelt, to command a national audience, said Arthur Schlesinger, Jr., a student of his at Harvard. No one did more in the post-war years to rouse public opinion against the spoilers than DeVoto. DeVoto and Schlesinger had seen firsthand what unregulated industry could wreak in the arid lands when they drove cross-country together in the spring of 1940 and entered western Kansas past the 100th meridian. These were the last years of the Dust Bowl before FDR's soil conservation programs and the return rains of the 40s could heal the land. Wrote DeVoto, a cemetery was 10 inches deep in sand. Half the headstones had toppled into it and been partly covered. Sagging shacks that had been farmhouses had their windows blown out, and dust was 4 or 6 feet deep against their western walls and a foot deep against the far wall. A repulsive dust as fine as sifted flour. Now, 6 years after that trip with Schlesinger, DeVoto was confronted with the West's cattle barons, the liquidators of the grass, who were hell-bent on reducing the region to the same mess of dust. In 1946, the Joint Committee on Public Lands of the American National Livestock Association met in Salt Lake City to discuss the goal of undermining what few regulations had been placed on livestock operators under the newly formed Bureau of Land Management. The stock growers' ambition went further than mere deregulation. They hatched a plan with the help of friends in Congress to begin moving all federal land, the BLM and Forest Service domain, as well as the national parks, into the control of the states. The plan evolved through 1946, 47, 48, with legislation making its way on Capitol Hill. DeVoto covered the story for Harper's. He cautioned that the stock growers were attempting, quote, one of the biggest land grabs in American history. The public lands are first to be transferred to the states on the wholly justified assumption that there should be a state government not wholly compliant to the desires of stock growers. It could be pressured into compliance, he wrote in Harper's. Nothing in history suggests the states are adequate to protect their own resources or even want to, or suggests that cattlemen and sheepmen are capable of regulating themselves even for their own benefit, still less the public's, end quote. The long-term plan, he said, was to get rid of the public lands altogether, to place the common possession of the American people into private hands. The livestock industry went on the attack, mounted a PR campaign to discredit DeVoto, and pressured Harper's to cease its support.
Unmoved, the magazine continued for 3 years to publish his relentless exposés of the intrigues in the state houses and in the Western Caucasus. Devoto had convinced the editors, when no other publication that mattered in the East cared, that the threat of such land transfer was an existential one. This Land by Christopher.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here, Jennifer in Minneapolis. Hey, Jennifer, what's on your mind today?
Hi, yeah, Tom. I just wanted to say it even goes back further neoliberalism than the horse and sparrow. You know, it's the Confederate mentality where they had, all these white guys who had essentially nothing, and they were willing to fight and die in a civil war to protect the few rich white guys that owned plantations with thousands of slaves. And none of these other white guys, the 99%, could even compete with that labor because you can't compete with free labor. So they never got ahead, and yet there they were, willing to fight and die, get their legs sawed off while they bit down on something in the Civil War hospital, And, 750,000 people is the updated number that University of New York at Binghamton demography historian updated the number. The death toll is 750,000 people died in the American Civil War.
Wow.
And that's what they're fighting about is, these few, the 1% who own thousands of slaves, they should have the right because they're white and I'm white, and it's like, really?
Well,
you can't compete with that.
No, I get that. But let's remember also that that there was a draft in the South. The Confederacy had a draft, and it was very difficult to get out of unless you were wealthy. If you were a plantation owner or a professional, you could get out of the draft. But people bought their way out of the draft. I mean, there was a draft in the North too, and Lincoln, was okay with this, people buying their way out of the draft, and it was basically for wealthy people. So a lot of these people who were fighting in the Civil War, on both sides, frankly, were not fighting for principle. They were fighting because they had no choice, or at least to the best of their knowledge, they had no choice, which is a real tragedy.
Well, it is, but they still seem to have that mentality where you'll see these people with the Confederate flag wrapped around them, marching around for their, they call it their history or whatever, and
their
it's
heritage.
Like, no, it was the plantation owner.
Yeah, that's an excellent point and an important one to make. Jennifer, thank you. Well said. Stephanie, in Chicago, I'm assuming you're listening to WCPT?
No, I'm in Kankakee County, which is about 60 miles south of Chicago.
Okay, cool.
I want to just give you a quick view of rural communities. My community has 900 people. A lot of communities around here don't have over 1,000, maybe 2,000 people. What's killing rural America is corporate farmers. We call them big ag farmers. The big ag farmers have bought up 61% of my town.
Whoa.
And that means because their taxes are next to nothing. It has literally killed our tax base. We don't have a police department, fire department. Our roads are in terrible shape. We don't have enough money. Our school doesn't have computer classes, and we have to hire a gym teacher, a sub, whenever we get a hold of one. The pay rate for teachers is next to nothing. We don't have stores, and we got to drive 20 miles into Kankakee for a big store. Now, when you go across rural America, my husband was a truck driver, so the truck industry is in trouble. That's why he got out. If you go around to America, which is what America's 70% rural, 75% rural, a lot of towns don't have a regular grocery store. They have a dollar store as their main way to shop, which means they don't get fresh fruit and meat and vegetables.
Right. Food deserts.
Yeah. It's not just the black communities in Chicago. It's all over the country. Food deserts are everywhere.
Yep.
So everybody eats bad. Health is bad. You may not have a hospital anywhere near you, and you're eating bad, so your health is bad. You don't go to the doctor. The jobs, market is low. And you also have the problem with internet and phone service. If you go to a lot of rural communities, you'll see people walking the streets because they have to leave their house to get a phone signal, and it's not always a very good one. When Obama had set aside millions of dollars for rural communities to get internet, it never came. AT&T was one that was supposed to do Illinois, and they never touched any rural area. So you have people that don't have internet. They don't have, and when they took out all of the unemployment offices, people, and most jobs are online. Many communities don't have libraries, so you can go online to the library to fill out a job application. So rural America is really being destroyed by corporate America, be it the big ag farmers, be it the big ag stores. So when Walmart comes in, the small stores go. You've got Home Depot and all of them that are killing all the smaller,
hardware stores. Yeah.
Hardware stores. Yeah. So rural America is suffering, north and south.
Yeah.
And the outlook doesn't look any better.
Now, Stephanie, is your experience that this started in the 80s? I remember, Reagan stopped enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1982, and the result of that was this explosion of mergers and acquisitions, particularly in the ag industry, in the ag sector. And that led to all these family farms being lost in the 1980s, to the point that I think it was 88, 89 that Willie Nelson was doing Farm Aid, where he was out there in rural America actually raising money so the farmers could keep their houses. But millions, or hundreds of thousands anyway, of family farms lost their homes. The big ag corporations, they would drop commodity prices just before harvest, drop those prices so people couldn't even pay back the loans they'd taken out after they'd harvested and sold their product, and so then they were in trouble. So then they would have to sell their homes, and then the big ag companies would come in literally and buy their homes and offer to rent the house back to them if they'd work on the farm that they no longer own. And is that still going on? And is that a big is that the basis of a lot of this?
Well, it started out like that. They don't even rent the homes to these people anymore. You have hundreds of vacant farm homes where the farmers will put out and then rent their homes. The other part is, now people don't know this, we think our farmers feed America. They do not. Illinois farmers feed 0.02% of actual food. These big farmers grow for the commodity market overseas. They grow corn, wheat, and soy.
Right.
The meat is all of our meat is on these big meat farms. We have 2 pig farms out in this area. They stink like I don't know what, but you never see the pigs outside. So the way we're farming, and we're not feeding America, and the way that our stuff is being imported. Now, I drove from Kankakee County down to Champaign County, 2-hour drive. I went all the way to Indiana, and I went 2 hours west. There were no farms up because of the flooding.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't even trying. Some tried, and you can see everything got ruined. And so, like you said, the trucking industry, we have a lot of trucking industry down this area. They're not hiring, which is unheard of in the trucking industry.
Right.
And and to show you how bad it is down there, people are having a struggle paying $600 and $700 rent.
Wow.
Because the best people can do is work at fast food or these retails, and they're getting minimum wage. They're not getting 40 hours a week. There's no health care. There's no health care for miles in some towns. You have to drive 20 miles to a hospital if you're sick. A lot of rural areas. And when the big ag farmers, don't pay taxes, the schools don't make money. The roads go down. If Kankakee County is one of the places that none of the small towns in Kankakee have a police station. They all would have. If you get arrested, you have to go to the county jail too.
Right. Stephanie, you said that over 60% of your town is now owned by the big ag corporations, and they're not paying taxes. How do they get out of paying taxes if they own the property? I'm assuming you mean they own houses, they own land, they own businesses. How do they get away with not paying taxes?
They don't live in our community. They live somewhere else. They live in.
So the income, the profits that are being made from this stuff is not subject to local income taxes, but they are paying property taxes, aren't they?
Yeah, but the property taxes are less than 1/3 of what. Okay, I'll give you an example. A friend of mine has 40 acres. She pays, and hers is ag, and she pays $2,000. Now, if you were to pay that and it wasn't ag, that'd be the $5,000 to $6,000 in taxes a year. Okay,
right.
Or somewhere around 5. Now, if you got a farmer that's got 2,000 acres. And he may be paying $1,200 because even when they get tax breaks from being farmers, big ag,
Sure.
Farms are less taxed. But when the big ag companies get it, they also getting tax breaks and subsidies from the government, so they're paying even less.
Wow.
So they are killing rural America. And you know what? I almost don't feel sorry for them with what Trump is doing, because they voted on him.
Yeah.
And now we've got soy fields, and we've got where the soy is in some of the places. Now I've seen some people growing soy. I don't know where they're going to sell it at, because
the Chinese just said no more.
Yeah, so I don't know. America is sinking, and it's the big cities are doing. If there's any growth, it's in the larger cities, but there is definitely zero and even negative growth in rural communities. And like you said, internet service, there's no unemployment offices. They closed half of the post offices, so you have to drive miles because to get anything delivered. And it's sad. America is, the farmers were the backbone of our countries, and our truck drivers were following them because everything comes on a truck. And now that we don't have things coming on trucks, I don't know what's going to happen. It's people are scared, and I know white people are scarier than we are, but it's scary.
Yeah.
And Monsanto is also causing problems because the farmers have to buy from them. And another thing, the banks. This is the last thing I'm going to say. The banks. Let's say you're a farmer and you need a $40,000 tractor. They won't loan less than $100,000. So you got to get $100,000 to get a $40,000 tractor.
Wow.
And you have to buy something with that $100,000. You just can't give it back.
So it's like enforced indebtedness. That's astonishing. Stephanie, I'm sorry, we're running out of time here. The music has started, but thank you so much for the call and for all that information. It's great talking with you. Thank you so much, Stephanie. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I'm telling you, we have the smartest listeners in America and the most experienced and the most knowledgeable. It is such an honor and a pleasure to hang out with you people every day. And welcome back. John in Niles, Michigan. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hi, how you doing, Tom? Hey, listen, about the Epstein thing, I think he, being as wealthy as he is, there's always the possibility that he got a get-out-of-jail-free card, and he's got a double. It's not beyond the realm of possibility.
But what conceivable reason would Bill Barr and Donald Trump have for wanting to keep Jeffrey Epstein alive? I can come up with a dozen reasons why they'd want him dead.
Payoff, money.
I think these guys are wealthy enough that they don't need a few extra bucks from Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, I could see where, maybe he slipped a few bucks to his jailers to let him quietly commit suicide.
I think it was more than a few bucks.
Yeah.
It was probably in the millions of dollars.
Well, I mean, possibly. Yeah, certainly. I mean, he's not going to take it with him. So might as well give it away. But I just don't see any incentive. I mean, you're the second person who's called and suggested that maybe he didn't really die, and I'm not buying that. I don't see how that's possible.
Why would a billionaire kill himself? That's the last thing he wants to do. He bought a get out of jail
because he's facing the rest of his life in prison for child rape. I mean, that's something that child rapists don't do well in prison. They
do it all the time in Washington. It's part of the culture there. Look at Ambassador Kislyak and what he did. The politicians are bought off all the time. They're all political prostitutes.
Yeah.
And that's one thing about. I just want to add one thing about Bernie. He can't be paid for. He's as honest as the day is long. And what better litmus test would anyone want instead of these opportunists that come out of the woodwork that dilute his message? And I just think that Bernie is the real one that's going to change this country.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, there are two solid progressives in this race, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and I am very hopeful that one of them ends up our nominee. Because if they do, I think it's going to be like FDR. He was reelected 4 times, or elected 4 times. Gene in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Hey, Gene, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Great show today.
Thank you.
I'm floored by what Stephanie said. Oh, my God. Talking about her town and it just... As she's speaking, you know the truth when you hear it.
Yep.
It's real, you know. and Wilkes-Barre is pretty much in the same boat. But I do want to say that I did originally want to call about William Barr. So what I want to do is I want to know, Tom, you've spoken about William Barr. I've learned a lot about him through you. I've learned a lot just from reading. All about the Iran-Contra affair, about torture memos. This guy, how does he do it? How come we're powerless? Why can we not arrest this man? Why is he in charge of?
Because he's in charge of the police departments of this country. If anybody gets arrested in this country, it has to go through Bill Barr. He's not going to arrest himself.
So how do we take this power away from him?
Well,
I mean,
it's,
really
number one, publicity, and number two, elections. I mean, I don't think that, yes, you can impeach an attorney general. It's not going to happen. Mitch McConnell's not going to allow it to happen. And I think even the exercise would be an exercise in futility. What we need to do is get a president into office who's not going to put a man who is as corrupt as Bill Barr in as attorney general. It's just, we're just going to have to, hunker down for another year and a half here, Gene. I don't see an alternative. Thank you so much for the call, though. And it is a real struggle. I mean, we've got an insanely corrupt guy running our Justice Department. Not to mention the coal lobbyist running EPA. Hey, we just put up a new. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook,
Talk Media
Twitter,
News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do. Ellen Ratner's new book, and on the line with us is the author of Sideswipe, former Congressman Bob Ney. And Bob, welcome to the program. What's at the top of your news stack?
Well, thank you, Tom. There's so many things going on, of course, with Epstein, et cetera. But
hey, I have a question with regard to Epstein, if I may. Right after his house was raided, a story was leaked that they found thousands, as I recall, thousands of photographs, old movies from the 70s, 80s, 90s, presumably, and videotapes of these underage girls having sex with Jeffrey Epstein's friends and presumably with him. Those tapes are now in the possession of the Department of Justice, which is Bill Barr. I have not heard a word about them. What's going on with that?
I've heard nothing on it, period. All that I heard was there was a cache of an amazing amount of material confiscated and that it was damaging. We've heard that. Where it is, how they secured it, who has it, who all was in the chain of command, possession of the material, which is important in law enforcement, none of that. Right. I know of none of that. I don't know anybody asking that very question you just brought up, which somebody should be.
I think it's one of the most important questions out there. I mean, if he was allowed to suicide in order to deep six that documentary evidence, that suddenly it makes a lot of sense.
I mean, they need to know where it was, who was there. I mean, the media just does not do its job.
You're right.
You've asked a question that somebody should be, forcing the answer to that.
Yep.
And it's nothing they can't tell us.
Yeah.
Who was there? Were the New York authorities there with the Justice Department?
Right.
Was it a combination of everybody? I don't know the answer to that.
Yep.
It's important.
Yep. So anyhow, I interrupted you. You were going somewhere.
Oh, no problem. It's a very important question. And hang on, there'll be more and more and more on this one, period, the whole subject.
Or Bill Barr will bury it the same way he buried Iran-Contra back in 1992 when he was Attorney General then.
Well, he was good at that, too. But this one's so hot. We'll have to see what happens with it. I did want to mention this story about the fact that, the U.S. House overwhelmingly passed a resolution to condemn the boycott, disinvestment, and sanctions. It's called BDS movement. And that is something that's against Israel, the sanctions and the boycott movement.
For their behavior in Gaza and on the West Bank,
Yes, and overwhelmingly passed it. Now, Congresswoman Omar and Tlaib voted against the resolution. We all know that. While President Trump told advisors that he thinks that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu should use the Israel's anti-boycott law to bar those two members of Congress from entering Israel August the 18th when they're scheduled to go there. Now, there was a law passed in 2017 that was by Israel's parliament, the Knesset, and they passed a law requiring the interior minister to block foreign nationals from entering Israel if they supported boycotting the Jewish state. Now, in the case of these two members of Congress, however, Beamer, the ambassador from Israel to America, made it very clear that he and Israel have no intentions to block any member of Congress, no matter how they voted on this issue. Now, there was some communication from the Democratic leadership because there is an AIPAC-sponsored trip, and that could have been completely all disrupted, had they barred these two members who are scheduled, again, August 18th, to go there. And the reason I brought up this story is because now the president, our president, is saying that it's fake news that he, in fact, has told Israel that they should bar these two. That it's fake news because they can do whatever they want. But he told his advisors, who communicated, obviously, with the Israeli ambassador about barring these two. He was trying to create this huge explosion, basically, where
he's doing everything
now,
he can to go after these four women of color. I mean, that's the bottom line here.
Absolutely. And it would have created a huge explosion on the issue when Israel itself in no way indicated that.
Well, they don't want to get in the middle of it. I mean, they're taking enough heat for trying to block freedom of speech, basically.
Right, exactly. And so I did want to mention, because it was an attempt, and yes, the president can say, well, I didn't tell Israeli Ambassador Benjamin Netanyahu to do this, Israeli Prime Minister, but we all know how close they are anyway, so the message was sent from the president to advisors to the Israeli ambassador.
Yeah. Well, you wonder if Jared Kushner was in that loop. I mean, Netanyahu used to sleep in Jared Kushner's bedroom,
Well, if it's either Netanyahu or MBS, which is a great combination of two people, if it's either one, usually you can see Kushner there. I think, Tom, if I'm correct, I don't want to misstate, but there were 85 phone calls that Kushner had made over to MBS, and just tons of phone calls to Netanyahu.
Right.
And I know he technically
MBS being the dictator of Saudi Arabia.
Yes, Saudi Arabia. Mohammed bin Salman, also known in Saudi Arabia as Mr. Bonesaw, MBS. Right. Also known over that way.
Mr. Bonesaw, MBS, right?
Okay. Oh, yes. Well, I have friends in Saudi Arabia. I wouldn't dare even indicate anyone that I know there. But I have friends, and that's what they call him behind his back over there. MBS is called Mr. Bonesaw.
Wow.
Right. And then have you talked about the endangered species law?
No, real quick, Bob. We're hitting the break right now.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the Trump administration is finalizing changes. It would weaken endangered species in a monumental way as we haven't seen in decades since Richard Nixon created it.
Wow. These guys are retrograde.
Stay tuned.
Bob Ney, Congressman, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good talking with you. We'll be back. We've got some interesting guests for you, and we'll continue all these other conversations as we continue through the program. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hello, Progressive Voices tune-in listeners. I'm Casey Hobbs.
And I'm Shane Mason, and we're the hosts.
We say fight back!
book today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is A Woman of No Importance, The Untold Story of the American Spy Who Helped Win World War II by Sonia Purnell. This is from the prologue. France was falling. Burned-out cars, once strapped high with treasured possessions, were nosed crazily into ditches. Their beloved cargoes of dolls, clocks, and mirrors lay smashed around them and along mile upon mile of unfriendly road. Their owners, young and old, sprawled across the hot dust and were groaning or already silent. Yet the hordes just kept streaming past them, a never-ending line of hunger and exhaustion, too fearful to stop for days on end. 10 million women, children, and old men were on the move, all fleeing Hitler's ranks, pouring across the border from the east and the north. Entire cities had uprooted themselves in a futile bid to escape the Nazi blitzkrieg that threatened to engulf them. The fevered talk was of German soldiers stripped to the waist in jubilation at the ease of their conquest. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of the dead. The babies had no milk, and the aged fell where they stood. The hordes drawing overladen old farm carts sagged and snarled in their sweat-drenched agony. The French heatwave of May 1940 was witness to this, the largest refugee exodus of all time. Day after day, a solitary moving vehicle weaved its way through the crowd with a striking young woman at the wheel. Private Virginia Hall often ran low on fuel and medicines, but still pressed on in her French Army ambulance toward the advancing enemy. She persevered even when the German Stukas came screaming down to drop 110-pound bombs onto the convoys all around her, torching the cars and cratering the roads. Even when fighter planes swept over the treetops to machine gun the ditches where women and children were trying to take cover from the carnage. Even though French soldiers were deserting their units, abandoning their weapons and running away, some in their tanks. Even when her left hip was shot with pain from continually pressing down on the clutch with her prosthetic foot. Now, at the age of 34, her mission marked the turning point after years of cruel rejection. For her own sake, as much as for the casualties she was picking up from the battlefields and ferrying to the hospital, she could not fail again. There were many reasons why she was willingly jeopardizing her life far from home in aid of a foreign country when millions of others were giving up. Perhaps foremost among them was that it had been so long since she had felt so thrillingly alive. Disgusted with the cowardice of the deserters, she could not understand why they would not continue the fight. But then she had little to lose. The French still remembered sacrificing a third of their young menfolk to the Great War, and a nation of widows and orphans were in no mood for more bloodshed. Virginia, though, intended to go on the road, wherever the battle took her. She was prepared to take whatever risks, face down any dangers. Total war against the Third Reich might perversely offer her one last hope of personal peace. Yet even this was as nothing compared with what was to come in a life that drew out into a Homeric tale of adventure, action, and seemingly unfathomable courage. Virginia Hall's service in the France of summer 1940 was merely an apprenticeship for a near-suicide mission against the tyranny of the Nazis and their puppeteers in France. She helped to pioneer a daredevil role in espionage, sabotage, and subversion behind enemy lines in an era when women barely featured in the prism of heroism, when their part in combat was confined to the supportive and the palliative, when they were just expected to look nice and act obedient and let the men do the heavy lifting, when disabled women or men were confined to staying at home and leading often narrow, unsatisfying lives. The fact that a young woman who had lost her leg in tragic circumstances broke through the tightest constrictions and overcame prejudice and even hostility to help the Allies win the Second World War is astonishing. That a female guerrilla leader of her stature remains so little known to this day is incredible. Yet that is perhaps how Virginia would have wanted it. She operated in the shadows, and that was where she was happiest, even to her closest allies in France. She seemed to have no home or family or regiment, merely a burning desire to defeat the Nazis. They knew neither her real name nor her nationality, nor how she had arrived in their midst. Constantly changing in looks and demeanor, surfacing without notice across whole swaths of France, only to disappear again as suddenly, she remained an enigma throughout the war, and in some ways after it, too. Even now, Tracing her story has involved 3 solid years of detective work, taking me from the National Archives in London, the Resistance Files in Lyon, and the parachute drop zones in the Haute-Loire, to the judicial dossiers of Paris and even the white marble corridors of CIA headquarters at Langley. My search led me through 9 levels of security clearance into the heart of today's world of American espionage. I have discussed the pressures of operating in enemy territory with a former member of Britain's special services and ex-intelligence officers from both sides of the Atlantic. I've tracked down files that were missing and discovered that others remain mysteriously lost or unaccounted for. I have spent days drawing diagrams matching dozens of code names with scores of her missions, months hunting for remaining extracts of these strange disappeared papers, years digging out forgotten documents and memoirs. The book A Woman of No Importance by Sonia Purnell.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Century through the 19th century and into the 20th century. From 1790 guns for
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We have been talking about, the Epstein thing. We've been talking about the destruction of rural America by Reaganomics and neoliberal policies. We'll continue those conversations and more. And then there is more news out there as well in just a few minutes. But first, on the line with us right now is Lisa Stifler. She is the Senior Policy Counsel at the Center for Responsible Lending. The website is responsiblelending.org. The Twitter handle CRL Online. And Lisa, welcome to the program.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me this afternoon.
Thanks for joining us.
This morning for you, I guess.
You know, this is fascinating stuff, and you know, you sent us a note, or somebody from your office sent us a note saying that this was totally flying under the public radar, and you're absolutely right. It was flying under the radar so much that I was unaware of it. Tell it these CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, has, which is responsible for making sure that we don't get robbed by companies and people in the finance industry, banksters and investment advisors and things like that. They are rewriting their, quote, debt collection rule. First of all, what is the debt collection rule? And secondly, what is this rewrite? Why should we all know about this? Why is this such important stuff? So one of the key reasons why this is important is this rule that they are proposing is the first ever federal rule related to debt collection practices. We have a federal law, the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, that was enacted in 1978. It has not substantially been updated since then. So and the CFPB was the first federal agency to have oversight over rulemaking related to that law. And so this rule proposal represents that first attempt to write a rule. And one of the key concerns about some of the sort of rollbacks that we've seen when they had considered some of the proposals a couple of years ago, it wasn't an official proposed rule, but in this proposed rule that we have now, they have weakened some of the provisions that they were originally considering a few years ago. So, specifically? what will this mean for the average person who might find themselves on the receiving end of a debt collector?
Right. So one of the biggest concerns we have is that this proposal will create an environment whereby collectors will be able to continue harassing people, everyday people, whether they owe a debt or not, just whomever they're pursuing, and it'll allow them to continue an environment of harassment legally. It'll allow 7 calls a week per debt owed, and then it'll also, for the first time, authorize the use of email, texting, and private social media without a consumer's consent and without real limits.
So not only can they call you once a day to harass you, but now they can stalk you on Facebook, basically?
Well, private messages, yes.
Right.
They will. And one of the things to underscore about the one call a day is most people have more than one debt. If many people are struggling to make ends meet and live day to day. And so a lot of people are, the debts that they have are just because of living everyday life, whether it's to try to, pay for groceries, or they have a medical bill that they weren't expecting from a hospital visit. And many times those hospital visits result in multiple accounts and multiple debts. So one visit can result in 7 accounts, and 7 calls a week per debt is 49 calls a week.
Wow. And is this the result of any sort of philosophical position that the Trump administration and the Republican Party have taken, or is this simply another example of how an industry, with the approval of the Supreme Court through Citizens United and Buckley and whatnot, other decisions, how an industry can basically walk into Congress, buy a bunch of politicians, walk into the Trump White House, buy the Trump administration, and say, here's a bunch of money, now do what we want?
Well, we definitely have seen and have significant concerns about the way the leadership at the CFPB has proceeded in the past 2 years under the Trump administration. And we feel like the debt collection proposal is another example of the agency failing at its mission to protect consumers and instead protecting industry. So we definitely worry that this is in line with that.
Mick Mulvaney was this, cokehead, Koch brothers owned Republican state representative, U.S. representative, congressman. And Trump put him, he's now Trump's chief of staff, but wasn't he in charge of the CFPB for a while?
He was acting director of the CFPB for a while until the current head is Kathy Kraninger.
Yeah. So, wow. So ideology as much as good old-fashioned corruption. It's totally bizarre. Lisa, thanks so much for the information.
Thanks for having me on today, Tom.
Yeah, my pleasure. Good talking with you. Lisa Stifler, she is the Senior Policy Counsel at the Center for Responsible Lending. ResponsibleLending.org is the website. CR Online is the Twitter handle. Amazing. Amazing. And so back to your calls here on all these topics. Gary in Baden, Pennsylvania. Hey, Gary, what's up?
Hello, Thom Hartmann. Thank you.
Sure.
Greed has no heart ever. It's the core of our problem.
Amen.
Having said that, and I'm going to quickly get to the point why I called. I've got the new title for your new book later sometime early next year or next year.
Okay.
Breaking Point.
Oh, that's a good one. We're there.
It is. I thought it.
We're absolutely there. I mean, rural America, hit that, I think, a decade ago.
Pardon me?
I said rural America, I think, hit the breaking point a decade ago. We've seen this explosion now in rural America. Obesity, heart disease, type 2 diabetes.
Right.
The places that are supposedly growing our food, actually they're growing mostly, food that's going to farm animals, but nonetheless, the people that are supposed to be growing our food are suffering malnutrition and all kinds of problems.
Right. Too many people in our culture, if you will, and I'm not making judgments on anybody, fail to recognize the human element. They feel that money, success is more important. It's really the other way around.
Yeah.
Having said that, I believe one of the core things it did start, I believe it really dug in when Reagan became president. I think it was the decline. I think one of the major things that caused the middle class to decline is the decline, the parallel to the union movement, to unions.
Oh yeah, and it wasn't. Let's not call it the decline of unions, Gary. Let's call it the destruction of unions by Reaganomics and by Ronald Reagan, because the union movement had been growing right up until 1981, and then at that point you had a third of Americans, unionized, which meant 2/3 of Americans had the equivalent of a good union job. We're down now to 10% of Americans being unionized, only 6% in the private economy. And so, only 20% of Americans have the equivalent of a union job, or less than that, actually, because 4% is in the government sector.
Right.
So,
Breaking Point, the title of your new book.
There you go. Okay, Gary, thank you very much.
All right, bye-bye.
Good to hear from you. Donna in Hillsdale, Michigan. Hey, Donna, what's up?
Oh, hey, I had to correct myself when I started listening to Stephanie, because she, for a while I thought she was talking about our area. I have a horse. I can't get hay because the weather was so horrible, farmers couldn't get in the field. So this is, as far as big ag coming in, when they come in now, usually the farms are old, because all the kids move away from here. You can't find a service here at all, and so people stop taking care of their houses. You can't get an electrician, a plumber, a carpenter, unless you get real lucky, and so these houses just start to degrade after a while. And when the big ag comes in and buys their farm when they die, or when the kids put it up for sale or put it on the auction so they get it for pennies.
Or when the family goes bankrupt.
They just take everything. They level everything. And they take all the trees out. And it's just...
So they basically...
Now is it was my dream, and now it's a hardship.
Wow. So when big ag comes in, they don't just buy the farm and rent the house back to the farmers. Stephanie corrected me on that. That was back in the 80s under Reagan. What they do now, you're saying, is they literally take out the house and they convert
take everything out.
They convert the yard and everything else into ag
regular
property.
Farms have hedgerows, and there's a strip of in between fields to keep from the wind blowing all the topsoil away. There's very little topsoil left around here, so. And all of the cattle are raised in barns, calf barns, pig barns. There's no grazing animals except for Belgians and horses. But the weather is part of this, because they talk about the South American, the Central American immigrants coming here. They've been on a 5-year drought.
Right, in Guatemala.
And so they can't feed themselves anymore.
Yep.
We ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah, I think.
Now we're in a drought.
Yeah. This is climate change on top of neoliberalism, and now it's insane. Donna, thank you for the call.
It's almost like we're doomed.
Yeah, well, hopefully we can wake up enough people in this next election. We'll clean things up. Donna, thank you for the call. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy. Iowa is the great Midwest. What are you learning? What are you hearing there?
I'm in the Missouri Valley, where a lot of flooding down to the south of me is occurring. It's starting to dry up now, but it's been awful wet.
Yeah.
I have a couple of points, and I'll stick to one, and if we have time...
No, we have 30 seconds, Randy, right now. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, the point is that the debt collectors that are that she's worried about that can call one a day for... AT&T sells a phone system with, I think it's a base phone and 2 satellite phones for $99, and it will filter out all junk calls. And that's political... bill collector, all that stuff. It will not ring through.
Huh, interesting. It seems like that's a growing business. What I discovered, Randy, is when I stopped answering calls I didn't recognize, my spam call frequency went from 5 or 6 a day down to 1 or 2 a day, and now it's 1 or 2 a week, because I just never if I don't recognize the number, if it's somebody who is not in my contacts list, they have to leave voicemail. Randy, thanks for the call.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
18 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Don in Berkeley, California. Hey, Don, what's on your mind today?
Hey there. Just wanted to let you know with the interest rates falling, it hurts another group, which is the retirees. I'm about to retire. You know, I've been a good boy, paid my Social Security. I'll be getting that. I actually work at a university, so I'll be getting a pension. But the third leg to that is to the investments is bonds and
right
and such. With the interest rates dropping, it makes it very difficult to find any kind of income. And in the bonds that I do have, I'll have a coupon of, let's say, 5% interest. Those are being called.
Yeah.
So it can be refinanced. And
so they can run them at 2%
lower.
instead of 5%.
Exactly. So it's going to be fun here in the future. You know, if all proceeds according to precedent, December 2020, I'll be retiring. So it's been fun trying to juggle my portfolio.
Yeah, this is a really tough thing for anybody, particularly anybody who's not expecting to live more than 40 years. I mean, you know, for people who are over 50, basically, is that, you know, you're looking for a fixed income that is predictable, and traditionally that was bonds. You'd buy, you know, and particularly tax-free bonds. You know, although tax-free bonds are really more for high-income earners because you get the tax-free part. But you'd buy bonds and you'd get, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8%. I mean, there was a time in the 70s where you could get 12, 15% on your bonds, and now bonds are paying 1 and 2% at the top end. And so the other thing to do is to look at stocks that you know reliably pay dividends, which are things like, you know, ExxonMobil. And the problem there is you're buying into the stock market. So yeah, you might make a dividend, but if the market collapses, and everybody's expecting it to any day now, then your investment goes to hell anyway. So what do you do?
That's right. That's right.
And if you buy an annuity,
waiting patiently.
right? And if you buy an annuity, you're buying it from a company that's heavily invested in the bond market or the stock market, and they could go belly up too. So yeah, excellent point, Don. Thank you for calling and making it. I appreciate it. Gloria in Roberts, Illinois. Hey, Gloria, what's on your mind?
I was just calling about the caller, Stephanie, I believe it was.
Mm-hmm.
I live in a small town in the east part of central Illinois, and we're not suffering from too much rain. We're in the midst of a drought.
Well, that's kind of the same thing. I mean, that has been the problem, is that in some areas there was too much rain, and in other areas there's not enough rain because the jet stream is collapsing because of global warming, and the jet stream is what pushes weather through. So what used to be a one-day rainfall now becomes a 10-day rainfall. What used to be one day of nice, warm, sunny weather now becomes 2 weeks of warm, sunny weather. And so, you know, what used to be rain becomes floods, and what used to be nice weather becomes droughts.
Yes. Ours has been like 3 months. I think we've had two or 3 days where it's rained and maybe a tenth of an inch.
Right.
And the whole thing, and that's it. But
Incredible.
we also have farmers that have been farmers for a long time in this area, and they are not buying land, but it's not a corporation, it's a foreign person like Canada and China.
Yeah. Foreign investors.
And they're,
they're buying up U.S. real estate. In fact, about 10% of U.S. real estate is now foreign-owned. 1/5 of all U.S. assets are now foreign-owned. It's amazing. Gloria, thank you. Thank you for the call, and thanks for the information. We'll be right back. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Lewis in Chicago, it says here you disagree with me. What's up?
Yeah, this Epstein stuff started way back when Obama was in, and no one cared to further prosecute him because he's a big liberal that has donated millions and millions. He's donated a
Actually,
little bit
it was 2008 when Epstein cut that deal with Alex Acosta, who was appointed by George W. Bush as the federal prosecutor down in Florida. This has nothing to do with Obama. This is the Bush administration, Lewis.
These are all Democratic donors that are part of this pedophile ring. All these rich billionaires are Democrats.
Right.
And
Yeah, all of them. Every single one. Right. I'm sorry. You can go back to 8chan. It's like, jeez. Scott in Hurricane, West Virginia. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind?
Oh, I just heard that last wackadoodle caller. These, they have a way of turning everything 180 degrees.
Sure.
And so we got Bill Barr and all these Trumpicites that are protecting Trump. Trump comes out and says, this is a conspiracy, and he wants to blame it on the Clintons.
Right, when Epstein introduced him to his current wife.
Yeah, well, that's telling us that Trump is spinning it 180 degrees, and he's a wannabe mobster. He knows dead men tell no tales.
Yeah.
What does Epstein have that would put all these other high-end people, on the chopping block?
Well, I think we found out when the FBI raided his home a month or so ago, and they found all this documentary evidence, all these videos and photos and old home movies of Epstein's friends, wealthy, powerful friends, men having sex with underage girls, and that's now in the possession of Bill Barr in the Department of Justice, and it was under Bill Barr's supervision in a Department of Justice prison where Jeffrey Epstein was, apparently allowed to commit suicide.
That's all going to disappear.
I think you're right. I think you're right. I mean, this is why when Congressman Barr was on earlier, I said, what happened to those pictures? I've not seen a single mention of them in the media. And he's like, geez, neither have I. That's a good question.
Well, you can't trust Barr. You can't trust,
No, Bill Barr, our current Attorney General, was Attorney General in 1992, and he was the one who engineered, according to William Safire in the New York Times, he was the one who engineered the cover-up of the Iran-Contra conspiracy, the Iran-Contra scandal, that, where Reagan was trading weapons to Iran in exchange for their holding the hostages long enough that Jimmy Carter couldn't get elected in 1980. I mean, it's insane. Anyhow, Scott, thanks for the call. It's good to hear from you. We'll be back. We're gonna check in. We're gonna do a little a fascinating deep dive, or maybe a shallow dive into medicine. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back. It is coming up on 28 minutes past the hour here on the place where smart people get their news. Our book today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is A Woman of No Importance, The Untold Story of the American Spy Who Helped Win World War II by Sonia Purnell. This is from the prologue. France was falling. Burned-out cars, once strapped high with treasured possessions, were nosed crazily into ditches. Their beloved cargoes of dolls, clocks, and mirrors lay smashed around them and along mile upon mile of unfriendly road. Their owners, young and old, sprawled across the hot dust and were groaning or already silent. Yet the hordes just kept streaming past them, a never-ending line of hunger and exhaustion, too fearful to stop for days on end. 10 million women, children, and old men were on the move, all fleeing Hitler's ranks, pouring across the border from the east and the north. Entire cities had uprooted themselves in a futile bid to escape the Nazi blitzkrieg that threatened to engulf them. The fevered talk was of German soldiers stripped to the waist in jubilation at the ease of their conquest. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of the dead. The babies had no milk, and the aged fell where they stood. The hordes drawing overladen old farm carts sagged and snarled in their sweat-drenched agony. The French heat wave of May 1940 was witness to this, the largest refugee exodus of all time. Day after day, a solitary moving vehicle weaved its way through the crowd with a striking young woman at the wheel. Private Virginia Hall often ran low on fuel and medicines, but still pressed on in her French Army ambulance toward the advancing enemy. She persevered even when the German Stukas came screaming down to drop 110-pound bombs onto the convoys all around her, torching the cars and cratering the roads. Even when fighter planes swept over the treetops to machine gun the ditches where women and children were trying to take cover from the carnage. Even though French soldiers were deserting their units, abandoning their weapons and running away, some in their tanks. Even when her left hip was shot with pain from continually pressing down on the clutch with her prosthetic foot. Now, at the age of 34, her mission marked the turning point after years of cruel rejection. For her own sake, as much as for the casualties she was picking up from the battlefields and ferrying to the hospital, she could not fail again. There were many reasons why she was willingly jeopardizing her life far from home in aid of a foreign country when millions of others were giving up. Perhaps foremost among them was that it had been so long since she had felt so thrillingly alive. Disgusted with the cowardice of the deserters, she could not understand why they would not continue the fight. But then she had little to lose. The French still remembered sacrificing a third of their young menfolk to the Great War, and a nation of widows and orphans were in no mood for more bloodshed. Virginia, though, intended to go on the road, wherever the battle took her. She was prepared to take whatever risks, face down any dangers. Total war against the Third Reich might perversely offer her one last hope of personal peace. Yet even this was as nothing compared with what was to come in a life that drew out into a Homeric tale of adventure, action, and seemingly unfathomable courage. Virginia Hall's service in the France of summer 1940 was merely an apprenticeship for a near-suicide mission against the tyranny of the Nazis and their puppeteers in France. She helped to pioneer a daredevil role in espionage, sabotage, and subversion behind enemy lines in an era when women barely featured in the prism of heroism, when their part in combat was confined to the supportive and the palliative, when they were just expected to look nice and act obedient and let the men do the heavy lifting, when disabled women or men were confined to staying at home and leading often narrow, unsatisfying lives. The fact that a young woman who had lost her leg in tragic circumstances broke through the tightest constrictions and overcame prejudice and even hostility to help the Allies win the Second World War is astonishing. That a female guerrilla leader of her stature remains so little known to this day is incredible. Yet that is perhaps how Virginia would have wanted it. She operated in the shadows, and that was where she was happiest, even to her closest allies in France. She seemed to have no home or family or regiment, merely a burning desire to defeat the Nazis. They knew neither her real name nor her nationality, nor how she had arrived in their midst. Constantly changing in looks and demeanor, surfacing without notice across whole swaths of France, only to disappear again as suddenly, she remained an enigma throughout the war, and in some ways after it, too. Even now, tracing her story has involved 3 solid years of detective work, taking me from the National Archives in London, the Resistance Files in Lyon, and the parachute drop zones in the Haute-Loire, to the judicial dossiers of Paris and even the white marble corridors of CIA headquarters at Langley. My search led me through 9 levels of security clearance into the heart of today's world of American espionage. I have discussed the pressures of operating in enemy territory with a former member of Britain's special services and ex-intelligence officers from both sides of the Atlantic. I've tracked down files that were missing and discovered that others remain mysteriously lost or unaccounted for. I have spent days drawing diagrams matching dozens of code names with scores of her missions, months hunting for remaining extracts of these strange disappeared papers, years digging out forgotten documents and memoirs. The book A Woman of No Importance by Sonia Purnell.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you by Phone.com. Phone.com delivers phone service for business. Learn more at Phone.com using the code TOM, T-H-O-M. So if you are a leader or team player within a healthcare organization, a teacher or trainer of healthcare professionals, a next-generation healthcare professional or student, a public health professional, a patient representative, patient safety or quality of care professional, a therapist, professional society representative, there's a conference in San Francisco coming up September 12th through the 14th of this year that you should know about. It's called Heart-Based Medicine. And Dr. John Bonhoeffer is an MD and professor of pediatrics at the University Children's Hospital in Basel, Switzerland. He's the co-founder or the founder of the Heart-Based Medicine Foundation. Andrea Gardner is with him. She's a communication specialist, author, and Reiki master. Heartbasedmedicine.org is the website, and Heartbased MED is the Twitter handle. And Jan, excuse me, or is it Jan? And Andrea, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Good to be here.
Great to have you both. So please correct my pronunciation if it's Jan or Jan. Dr. Bonhoeffer, tell us about this program.
Thank you, Tom. Well, this program is important and dear to us because the medical system is at a crisis. And everybody knows this. This is a policy issue, and yet kind of hiding beyond and behind policy and politicians is not enough. And we know that the system is in a crisis based on fraud, waste, abuse, and I would add arrogance and greed. Just look at the numbers. Look at depression and suicide being at all-time high in the population. Look at healthcare providers being the profession with the highest suicide rate. Look at medical errors as the 3rd leading cause of death in the U.S. 200,000 people in the U.S. dying. And a lot of this is due to a question of care. It's due to a lack of care, in my opinion. And it's not blaming. It's not that my colleagues and myself are not caring enough. Everybody's doing their level best. But the system is such, and the time constraints are such that really care comes behind knowledge and systems and SOPs and red tape.
Yeah. Andrea, how would you describe heart-based medicine?
Heart-based medicine is a platform for bringing more compassion and more care into healthcare. It's about connection. It's about love. It's about connection. It's about deep listening. We've actually prepared some gifts for your listeners, which tell you how to bring more simple and effective ways into your daily practice and how you can get involved in this culture change.
Into your daily practice if you're a healthcare professional?
If you're a healthcare professional, but we also want to hear from patients. If patients have had experiences within hospital environments, they have stories to tell. We want to hear from them too.
Yeah. Dr. Bonhoeffer, why did you start this foundation, Heart-Based Medicine Foundation?
Well, I worked in public health and worked 20 years in vaccine safety research. And as a pediatrician, I felt that this is probably the most effective way I can save lives and protect the health of our children. And it took me 20 years to realize that we're missing the elephant in the room, and probably the most common, most frequently transmitted disease in humankind today is not any of the diseases that I was aiming to prevent, but it is a virus, if you like, or a transmittable disease that I would call non-love. And it's time that we start to address it. Everybody knows how important love and care, compassion is in healthcare and to being better and to becoming well. This is really common understanding, and it's not part of medical training. And it took me too long to realize this, and so I want to dedicate my next 20 years to this topic.
Yeah. Andrea, I know you're an alternative health practitioner, as it were, or complementary medicine, or whatever whatever they call it there in Europe. These are the words that we use here. And I find it ironic that health care is so often delivered by people operating out of an entirely Cartesian model, viewing the body as a machine, viewing the person as separate from their body, viewing their emotional, psychological, human needs as irrelevant by and large. Just what's the white cell count? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, sure. I have to agree with you. In my practice, it's certainly about compassionate communication as much as anything else, which is part of the prescription, if you like. So we need to move away from that model of, the body as a machine. It's so much more than that.
Yeah, very, very well said. Andrea Gardner and Dr. Jan Bonhoeffer, and the website is heartbasedmedicine.org, and you want to find out about the summit, September 12th through the 14th in San Francisco. It's right there at the top of the website. Check it out. Their Twitter handle is heartbasedmed. And Andrea and Dr. Bonhoeffer, thank you for dropping by today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tom.
Great talking with you. I really appreciate it. So back to the news of the day. This is kind of apropos of what we were just talking about. The Sheriff's Department in Washington State, this is Whatcom County. We were talking about rural America earlier. This is rural Washington State. This is just north of us. A 77-year-old man called 911, the emergency number, and told the dispatcher, I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill myself. So they sent the police out, and what they found was that he and his wife were both dead. They're treating it as a murder-suicide. And this from the Sheriff's Department Post, quote, several notes were left citing severe ongoing medical problems with the wife and expressing concerns that the couple did not have sufficient resources to pay for medical care. Next of kin information was left in a note, and detectives are working with out-of-state law enforcement to notify the next of kin. He says it's very tragic. This is what the sheriff said. It's very tragic that one of our senior citizens would find himself in such desperate circumstances where he felt murder and suicide were the only option. Americans, by the way, spend more on health care than any other people in the world. Literally, in the world. 20% of our gross domestic product goes to health care. Well, it goes to the healthcare industry. We know that the healthcare industry is skimming 20, 30% off the top from that. And apropos of that now, Senator Bernie Sanders has come out, and I'm sure he's not unique in this, but he sent a letter to Matt Ailes and Stephen Ubel. Who are Matt Ailes and Stephen Ubel? Well, it turns out that Matt Ailes is the head of the AHIP, America's Health Insurance Plans, in other words, the lobbying group that represents health insurance companies. And Stephen Ubel, UBL, is the head of PhRMA, the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, the lobbyists for the drug companies. So the lobbyists for the health insurance companies and the lobbyists for the drug companies, Bernie sent them this letter saying, and I quote, please explain to the American people why you believe it is more important to spend such an enormous sum of money on advertising, lobbying, and campaign contributions than it is to make sure that no one in the wealthiest country in the world dies or goes bankrupt because they can't afford to purchase life-saving prescription drugs or go to a doctor. You made $100 billion in profits last year. How much are you going to be spending of that $100 billion to oppose Medicare for all? Is it $200 million? Is it $500 million? Is it $1 billion in order to protect your profits? I think this is a really good question, and one that all Americans need to be asking of these guys. And Bernie just laid it right out there. Anyhow, Tim in Aloha, Oregon. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
Well, I was going to say a couple of things, but I'm listening to you now, Tom, and it's really interesting because I was with in Portland here. I was with a large healthcare provider for years and years, and I had a flawless payment record. And when I really needed them, they fell apart. Basically, it was disgusting. Now my wife and my sons all have the Affordable Care Act. I'm on Medicare now, thank goodness. It's a very good program, and it's working.
Right.
You know, there's been a few problems here and there because it's a new institution, but it works. All people have to do is pay attention a little bit, you know, to what their needs are, and they can get things accomplished. I know a lot of people I've recommended Affordable Care Act, and they thought that it was no good, and then they said to me, "Wait a minute, Tim, I checked it out, and I am going to save money." They just have to get involved, basically.
Right, right. And Trump has turned off all the advertising for this, shut down the website for hours every day, made it harder and harder for people to sign up. And in a lot of the Republican-controlled states, it's even harder than that.
And then one other quick thing that I was going to say, I was in sales and marketing for 35 years, and I was in the auto industry for 20 years. And there's two key elements to any society, housing and transportation, period. Right. And what's happening now, if you read the statistics, it's scary with all these delinquent loans on housing. And young kids now, I have friends in the neighborhood who have grandkids and sons and daughters who are going to college. They can't afford an apartment. 5-6 people living in a one-bedroom apartment. This is becoming the rule and not the exception. You see what I mean?
Yeah, we're turning into a third world country as a result of 40 years of Reaganomics. It's just
scary,
that simple. Yeah, amen. Tim, thanks for the call. Charles in Fountain Valley, California. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Let me just segue off of 40 years of Reaganomics, and the Democrats are frightening as they campaign. They're so ready to talk about the problem that the corporate, that the billionaire class, real and corporate persons, has had a free ride over the last 40 years. You were speaking of it tangentially, talking about neoliberalism and breaking their taxes as part of that. And in fact, of the candidates, only Bill de Blasio in his 5 minutes at the second debate spoke to it. He spoke to the reality, and all the Democrats do. The rich aren't paying their taxes, but de Blasio talked about what needed to be done. If I'm elected president, he concluded his 5 minutes, I will tax the hell out of them. And for 40 years, the top bracket has been lowered.
Right. This is how inequality has exploded in the United States. Was rolling back the doubling down on, the Reagan tax cuts.
Exactly, and I wonder if you would agree. I see it as when wealth is concentrated in just a few people of the overall economy, that's wealth removed from the general economy of goods and services.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's absolutely right. Yeah, and rich people might buy a yacht from time to time, but as one of the founders of what is it, Progressive Millionaires or something like that, there's a group of millionaires who are advocating for raising their own taxes. He said to me, Nick Hanauer, I think his name was, he said, I may make 10,000 times more than you do, but I can't buy 10,000 more pairs of jeans.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
All right, I guess it's not so much he can't, but why would he, all right? And so, their money is not going into the productive economy. It's going into, quote, savings. We'll be back. And welcome back. Francis in Vashon, Washington. Hey, Francis, what's up?
Hi. My speakerphone's working. Can you hear me?
I hear you. That's fine, Francis. What's up?
Great.
Just put your mouth very close to the microphone.
Yeah, we lost our family farm during the Reagan-engineered farm crisis. My grandfather had homesteaded as an injured World War I veteran. And the thing and I lived in Iowa at the time, and was involved in very progressive, populist involvement. And what I noticed is that as soon as Reagan got a Republican House and Senate, they passed a tax cut that made corporations able to take a really good tax write-off on farmland. Mm-hmm. So suddenly your corporate farm and your corporate factory would cancel each other out. And then a year or two later, when the worst drought since the Dust Bowl hit the Midwest, Reagan's farm administration did nothing to help the farmers. And 60% of the farmland in the U.S. that was in the Midwest, that was family farms, got bought by corporations at really low prices.
Whoa. So that was how it all because I lived through that, but I don't remember. I didn't live rurally. I don't remember the specific details. So they basically set it up by changing the taxes and the laws, and then the drought hit, which and the Republicans. What's the old phrase? I think it was Karl Rove. well, it was somebody, it wasn't Karl Rove, but whoever it was, never let a crisis go to, it was Clinton's chief of staff. In any case, never, or maybe Obama's chief of staff, never, Rahm Emanuel, never let a crisis go to waste.
And it would have been worse, except South Dakota had a law passed during the Depression that only a family could buy a family farm.
Wow. So South Dakota is probably one of the few places in the country that still has some family farms.
At least after that farm crisis, that they didn't lose 60% of them.
That's remarkable.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add that in.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Francis. Thanks for the information. I appreciate that. Julie in Chadwick, Illinois. Hey, Julie, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's on your mind? Julie? Okay, Julie's listening to her TV, not her phone. Fred in Grass Valley, Oregon. Hey, Fred, what's on your mind?
Well, hi, Tom. I just want to give you a little more perspective on family farms in rural America. And I want to let you know that right now, you better give me a little chance to get my breath and load some lambs in the back of the pickup. Anyway, we're getting the same price for a wheat right now that we did when you get back pickup truck for $3,000 or $4,000.
Oh, interesting.
And you know it's price.
Right, and nowadays a pickup truck is $20,000 or more.
Go away. Hey, no, you're way behind.
Oh, really? 30, 40?
That'll cost you $60,000.
Whoa! You can tell it's been a long time since I've even looked at pickup truck prices. That's nuts.
Yeah. Anyway, I come from a county where 75% of the voters voted for Donald Trump, and I didn't. Anyway, I just want to let you know that it's tough out here on the farm, and we got here in this county that we're at. When I went to school here, we had 375 kids in high school. Now we have 100, and it takes the 7th and 8th grade to do that.
Wow. Yeah, this is middle America is being wiped out, and it's being wiped out by Republican policies, and yet they continue to vote Republican because they watch Fox News. It's insane. Fred, thanks for the call. We'll be right back. Stick around. Louise and I, Sean, Nate, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week, and I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter. It comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com, and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Right here with you, Chris in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Hey, so that couple you just mentioned that committed suicide in Washington State for medical bills. I lived in Washington for a little while, and they have an incredibly robust state Medicaid system. I think you're allowed to keep a homestead, but it's true you got to sell off all your assets so your heirs usually won't see any money. I just don't know if this is just the general public isn't made aware of good states that have good. It seems like there's a system.
Medicaid is not the solution to everything, Chris. And if you go to the hospital and you get all these surprise billing things, this is something that we thought that got outlawed by the Affordable Care Act, but apparently not, or maybe part of the Republican rollback of the Affordable Care Act is allowing it. But, people go into the hospital thinking that they've got insurance, including Medicare or Medicaid, that's going to cover all their expenses. And then when they get out of the hospital sends them a bill for $40,000, $50,000 or more. And sometimes just even for routine things like ER visits, because things are, quote, out of plan. And if these people, for example, if they had Medicare Advantage, which is actually privatized Medicare, and they went into a hospital that was not in plan, or one of the doctors, seeing them wasn't, quote, in the plan, then they end up with a huge bill. So, it's not that simple. It's not, Medicaid is going to take care of you. I'm sorry. The system has been reconfigured by the conservatives to basically screw everybody. It's just really that simple. Carrie in New Windsor, New York. Hey, Carrie, what's on your mind?
Hey, I'm calling about Epstein, and there was a wacko caller guy that called, and you said something about the I Ching, and so if you can tie that into Epstein, I'd like to tie Woodstock into Epstein. The 50th anniversary coming up.
All right. So go for it.
What did you mean when you mentioned the I Ching?
I didn't mention the I Ching. I have no idea what the caller meant.
Oh, yeah, no, he was saying something about everybody's a pedophile, like every single Democrat and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even catch the I Ching reference. All I caught was that he was trying to he was sounding like basically a troll on Twitter. Carrie, thanks for the call. Julie in Chadwick, Illinois. Hey, Julie, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I'm just kind of listening to all these callers talking about rural America, and I live in Illinois, about 120 miles west of Chicago, so pretty much close to Iowa. And, what Stephanie said about the farming industry, I don't have a lot to add there, but I'm really thinking about maybe how her area is being affected and how maybe that's similar to what's going on here. And
so what's going on there?
Well, a lot of people are struggling is what's happening. We're seeing stores close down. The mall had the Bergners and the JCPenney's. They closed down in just the last 3 years here. All these retail stores in between, that mall, it's not going to be able to survive. And sorry, I'm a little nervous, but
it's okay, Joe.
I think that people they can't get a good job, and we don't know why. We don't know who to blame. It's not for lack of trying. And anyways, I have so many family members that are struggling, and
There used to be laws called antitrust laws that were enforced. Reagan stopped enforcing them in 1982. There used to be antitrust laws on the books that prevented big companies from getting so big that they could wipe out the ability of small companies to compete. And when Reagan stopped enforcing the antitrust laws, you saw the growth in the retail industry, for example, of the Walmarts. The average Walmart comes into a community, it puts 120 businesses out of business. You saw the growth of, we went from literally having thousands of mid-size and small agricultural companies in supporting farmers, retailing product, wholesaling product, supplying seed, all kinds of things, to now having 4 companies basically completely dominate the agriculture industry in the United States. 3 companies own 80% of all meat production in the United States, for example.
We have 3 Walmarts here and a Walmart distribution center.
There you go. And so you're making my case. If you want to know what wiped out rural America, it was the Reagan administration's policy of no longer enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act.
And I tell you what's increasing is food banks, shelters. People are going to places to get free clothing now because they can't even afford to go to the store.
Yeah, it's very sad. Julie, thank you for the call. Thanks for sharing your story with us. I appreciate that. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. It's not something that just falls out of the sky, or comes with the news. It's something that requires a little bit of work on the part of all of us, which means showing up, which means participating, which means volunteering for your political party to be there. So get out there, get active, tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.